Chapter 159. As the most basic territory of the Stormwind Kingdom, the Elven Forest had always been a treasure in the eyes of the nobles. Not only did agricultural activities such as logging and rearing pigs and sheep allow the people to live a stable life, but it also brought continuous tax revenue to the nobles' territories. In addition, the Elven Forest itself had a large number of high-grade copper and other mineral resources. The Elven Forest was almost synonymous with not having to worry about food and clothing. If it wasn't for the thousands of years that every inch of the forest had been transferred by successive kings, no fool would spend so much effort to develop the barren Red Ridge Mountains in the east, the dark Twilight Forest in the south, or the monster-infested western wilderness. In the meeting hall, everyone's first reaction was that Xueqi had gone crazy. They instinctively wanted to deny Xueqi. Their second reaction was that it seemed to make sense. What happened to the Elven Forest? Did it have anything to do with them now? No. Not at all. No matter how much they denied it, they couldn't change the fact that the Elven Forest had fallen into the hands of those damned green skins. The rich natural resources of the past had all become resources for the green skins to raise their descendants. Thinking of their beautiful mansions and rich territories falling into the hands of those barbaric beasts, every noble gritted their teeth in hatred. One of the nobles asked weakly, "Won't we anger the druids by setting fire to the forest?" Then, a group of nobles looked at the small noble as if he was an idiot. They were facing a disaster here, and he still cared about the druids who had died somewhere? The nobles immediately fell silent. Noxus was the kind one to ask, "What about the orc spellcasters called warlocks?" I received absolutely accurate information from my master. At the moment, the strongest orc warlock Gul'dan will not be able to fight for some reason in the short term. The same goes for the Shadow Council. So, as long as you give me a griffin, I'll be safe. Noxus suddenly realized that in the battle with the orcs, the human side was almost suppressed in all aspects. It wasn't just the factor of individual combat power, but also the lack of understanding of the orc warlocks. The Storm royal family's mages were defeated in the battle with the Shadow Council, and the mages were almost dead in name. However, in recent days, there had been no orc warlocks attacking. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, the only remaining Morning Star wizard in the country would have to protect Lang. With just 3 sky wizards, they would not be a match for the Shadow Council. Lothar nodded at Lang. Lang stood up. "All right, I approve of this plan. But I have only one request for you, Earl Marcus." "Your Majesty, please speak." Xueqi stood up and bowed. "You must come back alive." Lang said earnestly, "Stormwind is on the verge of destruction, and it's not just you, Duke Marcus. For a 15-year-old like you, you've done enough, that's good enough. If the kingdom's fate is to be destroyed, I will calmly accept it. But in the future, when we rebuild Stormwind from the ruins, we still need young people like you to contribute." Hiss. Almost every noble sucked in a cold breath. If it had been anyone else, they would have at least given a military order, saying that if they did not complete the mission, they would die for the country. Now that it was Xueqi, Lang was actually so lenient that he did not even hesitate to bet on the kingdom's early destruction. How much did Lang value Xueqi? Such royal favor was unheard of. Even when Medivh was still alive, Lang had never pampered a Medivh so much. But thinking about it, it was normal. At this point, did Xueqi still need to prove himself? The youngest sky wizard, the richest merchant in the world, the sea king who held the kingdom's lifeline, the hero who killed the demon king Sargeras, saved the queen and the prince, and was the king's great benefactor. If not for the fear of not being rewarded in the future and being blocked by the nobles, Xueqi would have been a duke by now. Even so, everyone in the noble circle knew that Lang had already greeted the only Morning Star wizard. As long as the situation stabilized, Xueqi would inherit Medivh's position in the kingdom and become the chief court wizard of Stormwind. Xueqi's rise was unstoppable. Before Xueqi returned from Karazhan, no one was confident. Now, many nobles had secretly decided that if Xueqi's plan to stop the orcs for 10 days was successful, they would completely tie Xueqi to their family's war chariot. Compared to other nobles, King Lang had a fatal shortcoming. The royal bloodline was too thin. It was not only because he was not a direct descendant of Thoradin the Great, but also because Lang did not have any siblings. Similarly, the only heir was Prince Varian. The queen did not have a child with Lang. But other nobles were different. Wasn't it just a noble daughter? As long as they had a marriage alliance with Xueqi, even if they lost their territory, their family would still be able to live comfortably. If they could win back their territory in the future, that would be even better. Unknowingly, the nobles had begun to have ideas about Xueqi. Xueqi did not know what the nobles were thinking. After thanking Lang for his concern, he prepared to set off. But after stepping out of Stormwind Fortress, he was surprised to find a group of old friends waiting for him. Mentor Norton, I'm so happy to see you. Your aura is not bad. Yes, it was Old Man Norton. Darnielle and Aitana were also beside him. Xueqi noticed that these two former magic apprentices were now wearing the formal robes of the Royal Wizard Guild. You've advanced. This time, Xueqi was really surprised. Darnielle smiled foolishly. Aitana once said, "If you don't rise in war, you will perish in the flames of war." I just advanced to a level 1 Earth Mage last week. Aitana advanced 2 months before me, and is now a level 3 Earth Mage. The freckled Aitana gave Xueqi a standard ladylike bow, her face still a little stiff. Mentor Norton said that we should be able to help you. Old Man Norton came over and took Xueqi's hand affectionately. Don't refuse, Xueqi. This old man's old bones are about to fall apart. I'll thank the heavens if they can survive this battle. They have no future with me. Today, I'll throw away my old face. If you don't accept them, I'll kneel here for everyone to see. Don't. Xueqi knew that the old man was serious. Darnielle and Aitana, who were born as commoners, had long been labeled as Xueqis. If Xueqi didn't want them, these two really had nowhere to go. Xueqi turned to face the two. Okay, enough with the pleasantries. You two will follow me from now on. I want to ask you, do you want to become my followers? Or are you my henchmen? Darnielle scratched his head. Is there a difference? Aitana kicked Darnielle lightly. Of course I want to be a follower. Chapter 160. As for followers, it had nothing to do with nationality, religion, or even race. They were loyal only to Xueqi, who was a wizard. Retainers were different. After all, retainers were the direct subordinates of nobles. Even if the nobles in this era had a tongue twister saying that the subordinates of the nobles were not their own subordinates, it meant that the king could not control the retainers of the nobles. But with the king's righteousness, if the retainers betrayed the nobles, they could still claim to be loyal to the king. In terms of relationship, followers were closer, and it was more in line with the interests of the two young wizards. Even though he knew that the two had limited talent, Xueqi still accepted them as his followers. This master-follower relationship was also a perfect ending to the fateful encounter they had when they first came out of the Northshire Monastery together. All right, I'll give you a mission now. After settling the matters in Stormwind City, Xueqi did not move out that night. He had a good sleep. When Lothar asked him why he was so sure that the orcs would not come tonight, Xueqi replied, "Because the great chief of the horde is Black Hand." Lothar was perplexed by this. Duke wagged his index finger with a confident look on his face. This was the benefit of being a transmigrator. Only a transmigrator would know how different Blackhand's and the next great chief Orgrim Doomhammer's tactics were. Blackhand was indeed a very outstanding orc leader. His excellence was reflected in his ferocity and bravery. Blackhand, who drank the demon's blood, had the common weakness of most green-skinned orcs, violent and irrational. Other than fighting head-on, there was no other way. Orgrim, on the other hand, did not drink the demon's blood, which made his mind clear. This gave Orgrim a natural advantage when it came to military strategy. He was more intelligent and rational. It was the same for Orgrim in history. As one of the most intelligent orcs, Orgrim had once defeated the entire alliance. If it wasn't for the fact that the orcs had betrayed their teammates, perhaps the horde wouldn't have been defeated during the first incident at the Dark Portal. Xueqi was so sure that the horde would not be able to move out tonight because of his understanding of Blackhand. At this moment, in the tribe's camp, Black's hand, which had turned slightly carbonized due to the power of chaos and was extremely tough, punched Orgrim in the face. Even though Orgrim had already tightened his muscles in preparation for a heavy blow, Orgrim's resolute face was still severely deformed for a short period of time. Orgrim's gigantic body was sent flying out of the tent by Blackhand's punch. "You coward! The tribe doesn't need a coward like you," Blackhand roared. "They have a very powerful spellcaster. Where was Gul'dan when we needed spellcaster support the most? Where are the warlocks of the Shadow Council?" Orgrim roared back. Even though the beast men were brave and irrational, they still had rules. The mysterious was mysterious, and the warrior was a warrior. Since ancient times, the shamans of the tribe had been the ones to deal with the enemy's spellcasters. After the shaman profession withered, it was replaced by the warlock profession. The great tribal chief was speechless for a moment before saying, "Gul'dan has more important things to do, such as repairing the door of darkness." This was a sophistry, but it was also a good reason. If the door of darkness was repaired, then the tribe would have an endless supply of reinforcements. Even though the warriors left in that destroyed world were not the most elite, there were still many of them. Orgrim shook his head and stood up stubbornly. "Black Hand. Tomorrow. Give me another 20,000 elites from the Blackrock tribe. If I can't defeat them, you will see my head." "All right." Black Hand was prepared to act recklessly. Mirror Lake was located south of Stormwind City. If one went to Stormwind City from Goldflash Town, southeast of Stormwind City, it was easy to see this huge lake on the left side of the main road. Now, Mirror Lake had become one of the lifelines of the Beastmen army. It was currently summer, and the heat was scorching the earth, making both sides feel uncomfortable. When there was no battle, the Beastmen were happy to enjoy the cool air under the shade of trees. In order to prevent the damned fishmen and Nagas who obeyed the humans' orders from running into Mirror Lake, the Beastmen had to use thousands of laborers to build a temporary dam. This was to make it the most ideal water source for the Beastmen army. Mirror Lake was located at the foot of a small mountain. In order to prevent the humans from poisoning the lake, they only needed to set up enough patrols near the mouth of the spring. From the top of the mountain, they could clearly see all the movements on the outer wall of the human city of Stormwind City. However, early in the morning, an atmospheric circulation that almost surrounded the entire mountain appeared on this average-sized mountain. The constantly rotating circulation formed a storm, forming a wall of air that was nearly 100 meters tall at the peak of the mountain. The patrolling Beastmen tried to pass through this invisible wall of air to see what was happening. However, all the Beastmen who tried to do so were instantly torn apart by the violent wind. In the next moment, in response to the first rays of dawn, balls of flames, along with the radiance of the sun, began to spread grandly from the top of the mountain to the vast land. At first, every Beastman thought it was an illusion. But soon, when the blazing flames landed on the rough and messy roofs of the tribe's barracks, the fire easily spread. Fire! Fire! The sleepy Beastmen had just woken up from their dreams when they realized that the entire camp was in a sea of fire. The Beastmen were not unprepared for the humans' fire attack. Many Beastman officers instructed the stupid Beastmen to use sand to extinguish the fire. They also ordered the Beastmen to rush to Mirror Lake to fetch water to extinguish the fire. However, the flames in the sky became denser and denser. The ever-increasing fire made the Beastmen's efforts to extinguish the fire useless. Most of them held their weapons blankly and ran to the open space, not knowing what to do. Look up the mountain. Finally, some Beastmen realized that something was wrong. A majestic figure stood at the highest point of the mountain. Behind him, his cloak fluttered in the wind like a fluttering flag, attracting the attention of all the Beastmen. The figure bathed in the morning light was incomparably dazzling. It was as if he was the radiant sun, as if he was the son of light who dispelled all the darkness on the earth. Under the illumination of the morning light, the silver spell formation hanging in the air beside him had every fine line and every mysterious rune dyed with a layer of brilliant gold. Countless fireballs shot out from the spell formation, drawing red arcs in the sky that symbolized death and destruction, and fell to the ground in a shocking manner. The endless flames turned the entire land into a sea of fire in the short span of a dozen breaths. Orgrim rushed out of the tent and looked at the mysterious and terrifying figure. He squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth. Duke Marcus. Chapter 161. Of course you have to remember me, because I will become your nightmare. The words spoken by Duke in the Orc language were still echoing in Orgrim Doomhammer's ears. It was like mockery, but it was also like a nightmare that he could never escape from. Great Chief Blackhand brought his guards to Orgrim's side and roared, "You know that human mage?" Of course. It was this Duke Marcus who repelled the surprise attack of my men and me. I had already killed my way to the human chief's throne at that time. Blackhand's face twitched. Of course, he knew that the best way to deal with spellcasters was to find stronger ones. But he had no choice. The orders from the Shadow Council had not been cut off, and he could not even find a single warlock. Grabbing Orgrim's shoulder with one hand, Blackhand pulled Orgrim's body over and roared, Spittle flew all over Orgrim's face as he gave a death order. Now is the time for you to wash away your shame. My adjutant. In order to prevent you from escaping, Deadeye will keep an eye on you. Go. Orgrim's facial muscles twitched as if he was electrocuted. The word shame deeply stimulated Orgrim's nerves. He did not argue. In the eyes of the orcs, failure was failure. There was no way to refute it. The great chief was merciful enough that he did not execute him immediately because of this. Even though he still had the anger of his good friend Durotan's death buried deep in his heart, he knew that this was not the time to challenge Blackhand. Follow me. Orgrim waved his hand, and his elite beastmen charged towards the small hill not far from the Mirror Lake like a murderous flood. Beside the elites of the Blackrock clan led by Orgrim, there was also a fierce army marching side by side with Orgrim's army. It was Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan elites. The Bloodring was once the most powerful clan in the Horde. They still had a shocking number of people and powerful combat power. Unfortunately, they ran into Xueqi, who didn't have a warlock to suppress him. If they were the evil darkness that drowned the earth, then Xueqi was the light of dawn that washed away the shadows. In the morning light, Xueqi's entire body was shining with golden light. Behind him was a Stormwind lion flag. Xueqi stood at the top of the hill and looked down at the thousands of orcs who were crawling over like ants. Ha ha ha. Darnielle, help me carry the flag. I want to let these guys know that Stormwind is not to be trifled with. Ha 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 ha. Xueqi's maniacal laughter reached the ears of Darnielle, who was responsible for carrying the flag. Unknowingly, Darnielle had also become ambitious. He had often heard about how awesome Xueqi was, but he had never seen it for himself. He had never felt it so vividly. How many orcs were down there? There should be at least tens of thousands of them. This was a power that could destroy an entire kingdom. But could Xueqi face it so proudly? Looking at Xueqi bathed in the morning light, his entire body radiating brilliance, Darnielle was momentarily entranced. It was a kind of fanatical hero worship. Xueqi, a great general overseeing the battlefield? No. Using his own strength to shake the terrifying orc army that numbered in the tens of thousands, this had long surpassed the scope of a general. If the simple-minded Darnielle had to think of an adjective, it would be God, the guardian of the entire kingdom. At the foot of the hill, the orc warriors were fortunate enough to meet a human mage who was going all out without their own warlock suppressing them for the first time in the elven forest. Once the huge fireballs were hit, they would immediately release all the energy contained within them. The terrifying impact easily tore apart the grass and blew up the tree roots. The sputtering flames spread directly to the orc warriors. Fear of fire was the instinct of most creatures. That kind of burning sensation that exceeded the limits of the body wasn't something that every warrior could easily overcome with courage and surmount. 36 huge fire magic formations continuously tilted the water tank-sized fireballs. This was a firestorm that was even more intense than a meteor shower. Many orc warriors were blown into the sky by the fireballs. They fell and howled before being swallowed by the flames. In no time, they became corpses that emitted a disgusting burnt smell. The flames from the explosions continued to shine. Darnielle, who was behind Xueqi, could not help but narrow his eyes. Not far from his field of vision, even though many orcs were burned alive, more orcs had already entered the final charge. Their line of defense was spread out in an arc, neither too closely packed nor too sparsely spread out as they surrounded Xueqi. Of course, the 40-degree incline of the mountain path had slightly slowed down their speed. But for orcs who could climb mountains as easily as eating and drinking, this was not too much of a problem. Their advance did not slow down at all. "Cover your ears," Xueqi suddenly said. Darnielle did as he was told. In the next instant, a long river of flames suddenly appeared at the foot of the hill, immediately cutting off the orcs from entering the field. Then, there was a series of explosions. Those were the cannonballs that Xueqi had scattered on the hill in the morning. Because of this, Stormwind's few griffins were exhausted. Because the Horde had found a new direction to attack the city, the cannons placed at the main gate of Stormwind City had all lost their purpose. With limited transportation, these cannonballs could not be pulled away, so it was better for Xueqi to play with them. Just as they stepped halfway up the hill, the cannonballs that had been detonated by the fire kept exploding under the orc warriors' feet, creating pillars of fire mixed with mud. Brave and determined faces continuously fell in the flashes of the explosions, and the enraged orcs continued to advance toward the top of the hill over the corpses of their companions. They were still nearly 300 feet away from Xueqi. At this distance, the orcs could not do anything to Xueqi. But Xueqi could rely on his control of the elements in the surrounding sky to open up all the arcane fire magic circuits without hesitation, pouring magic onto the hill. The deafening sound of the explosions shocked the entire orc army, and even the human warriors on the outer walls of Stormwind City more than 1,000 feet away. Even if it was the lowest level of fireball, the impact it caused was quite shocking. The exploding fireball almost overturned the ground. On the originally lush hill beside the Mirror Lake, every branch was broken by the blazing heat wave. The broken branches kept falling, and then flying again. Among the Blackrock and Bloodring tribes that rushed up the hill, the flags that symbolized glory and power fell one after another. At the foot of the hill, the great chief Blackhand's eyes widened. This is impossible. In contrast, after seeing the raging fire and hearing the orc screams, the soldiers of Stormwind City burst into thunderous cheers. On top of the city wall, every warrior showed an expression of ecstasy. They knew that their new guardian, Duke Marcus, was teaching the orcs how to be human. Chapter 162. A normal wizard's fireball spell would not be as exaggerated as Xueqi's. It flew for 200 to 300 meters and did not dissipate. This kind of control was something only the highest-ranked wizards could have, but it appeared in Xueqi, a mere sky wizard. With the help of the system elf, Xueqi's control of elemental energy had reached a shocking level. He hit wherever he pointed, with the accuracy of a godly archer. He controlled tens of magic formations at the same time, and was far above Morningstar wizards in multicasting. Even though the orcs were no longer charging blindly like targets, and even though they had started to learn to move irregularly to avoid the fireballs. But the continuous torrent of fireballs still did not miss their target. Often, a fireball that did not hit the orc in front would hit the one behind due to the line of sight of the orc in front or some other reason. Sometimes, it looked as if Xueqi had shot a fireball, and the orcs had foolishly offered their heads to the fireball at the cost of their lives. The orcs' line of attack had already spread to more than 200 meters wide, but still, not a single orc could get within 150 meters of Xueqi. At a distance that looked like a small dot, not even a ballista would have a chance of hitting him, let alone long-range weapons like throwing axes. The water vapor around Xueqi evaporated due to the high temperature, causing Xueqi's figure to look strangely distorted from afar. Only the heavens knew if Dooku had set up a windshield or a similar defensive spell. But Darnielle was sure that Xueqi had at least the most basic protective arrow spell. Whether he had stacked 10 or tens of them, Darnielle could not tell. The concentration of elemental energy around Xueqi's body was so high that it was almost tangible. It could be said that Xueqi alone covered half of the battlefield. He had practically suppressed the orcs' attacks in all directions. This had completely surpassed skill, and was already in existence at the level of magical art. A magician is a source of firepower. Duke was a perfect example of this. Darnielle, who was behind Xueqi, was dumbfounded. A kind of involuntary worship and awe filled Darnielle's chest. Even though he knew that he would never reach the level of a sky mage, Darnielle could not suppress his yearning. So my master will definitely reach, no, even surpass the level of the previous guardian god, Medivh? Is he a super mage? Darnielle suddenly felt that it was worth it to die for Xueqi after witnessing this scene. It was supposed to be a one-sided massacre, but the whole situation was broken after a huge red figure appeared. In history, the next great chieftain of the Horde, Orgrim Doomhammer. The muscles around Xueqi's eyes twitched. He already knew that Orgrim had an exaggerated resistance to the elements, especially the fire element. It was obvious that Orgrim was going all out. Perhaps it was to defend against Xueqi's fireballs. Orgrim rushed over the mountain stream that flowed to the Mirror Lake. Orgrim's condition was clearly abnormal. Even the phrase, large strides, was not enough to describe his berserk state. With the hammer of destruction, that weighed at least 200 to 300 pounds, Orgrim ran as if he was flying. Every step he took covered more than 5 meters. In the eyes of humans, this was the distance of a triple jump. But for Orgrim, who was more than 2.5 meters tall, this was only the level of sprinting. What was even more frightening was the abnormality under his feet. Xueqi saw the steam billowing everywhere. Damn, are you an electric perm? Xueqi had long since given up on using fire spells to deal with Orgrim. With a wave of his hand, 36 magicians' hands appeared in the air 20 meters around Orgrim. There were 6 of them in a group, and they activated Arcane Impact. 2 seconds later, Xueqi was dumbfounded again. Ineffective. Ineffective. Completely ineffective. The surging arcane energy that was highly compressed crashed into Orgrim's body. Oh, it was less than 20 centimeters away from his body, and it was automatically dispelled by an even more powerful and mysterious force. This was a move that could send Orgrim flying again and again in the last battle, but now it was completely ineffective. Damn, are you sure you're not called Orgrim Saint Seiya? You can't use the same move twice? Orgrim, whose every step changed the color of the mountains and rivers, was already within 100 meters of Xueqi in a few breaths. Xueqi frowned and clasped his hands together. Instantly, the elements in the air changed again. Ha! With a light shout, the entire mountain spring froze under Duke's feet. The cruel cold air flowed along the flowing stream and froze the entire stream in an instant. Countless icicles abruptly extended along the river like a hedgehog. The high-speed icicles were sharp enough to pierce through any mortal's body. Arctic Wave. This was a self-created spell that Xueqi had modified from Darson's Cold Prison. Although it was not complete, Xueqi was confident that it could stop Orgrim. Xueqi succeeded. Although Orgrim's body was emitting heat, it was obvious that he was not used to the icicles that had physical properties. The high temperature continuously melted the icicles, but each icicle would pierce his body first, creating thumb-sized bloody holes. Ah! Faced with more and more icicles, Orgrim was surrounded. At this moment, another Beastman hero arrived. Kilrogg Deadeye. As the chieftain of one of the 7 largest Beastman tribes, Kilrogg's strength was definitely top-notch. If not for his old age, Xueqi was willing to bet that this old beastman's combat power was at least at the level of Black Hand. In front of Xueqi, Kilrogg displayed agility that was comparable to that of a night elf. Yes, agility. If Orgrim was said to be more like an angry lion, then Kilrogg was now an agile cheetah. He actually stepped on the blunt side of the icicles that Xueqi's icicles had pierced out, as if he was flying towards Xueqi. Multicast. Activate. This was not a spell that Xueqi had asked the system elf to cast, but Xueqi's own true multitasking. Its power was more than a level higher than the system elf spell. Blizzard. And Wide Area Icicle. For the first time, Xueqi showed the world his shocking magic circuit. No matter how agile Kilrogg was, he could not be immune to this kind of omnidirectional magic attack. For a moment, his figure also froze. Kilrogg was so anxious that he croaked. The beastmen behind him still wanted to rush forward, but they were suppressed by the system elf's hand of magic and the magic formation. Chapter 163. Darnielle, who was standing behind Xueqi, was completely dumbfounded. Every spell Xueqi used required the full strength of a top-level sky mage, but Xueqi was using 3 spells at the same time, and all of them were instantaneous spells that ignored incantations. And judging from the status of the 2 orcs, they should be of high status. Boss, who are they? In private, Xueqi insisted that Darnielle and Aitana call him boss. Oh, the chief of a top-level clan and the next chief of a tribe, replied Xueqi casually. Darnielle's face immediately turned green. Thanks to Garona's dissemination of tribal knowledge to the middle and upper echelons of Stormwind, most of the middle and high-ranking officers, as well as mages like Darnielle of the royal family, knew the general strength of the other side. It was generally accepted that the commanders of human armies could not defeat the chiefs of top-level clans, but could generally fight to a draw with the chiefs of second-rate clans. This was based on the many cases where the human armies were stripped of their numbers. It was simple, they were killed and their flags taken. In the many large-scale battles between Stormwind and the Horde, there were tragic cases where the commanders were killed and their flags taken. Only the publicly acknowledged god of war, Lothar, once killed the chief of a second-rate clan and saved some face. But this did not stop Lang from ordering the retreat of the army. A flag taken by the enemy was a disgrace, and a disgraced flag could not lead the soldiers to victory. This was an ironclad rule left behind by Thoradin the Great. So when he saw Xueqi single-handedly suppress the 2 famous heroes of the tribe, Darnielle's mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed inside. But good times did not last long, and Xueqi immediately exclaimed, "Holy shit!" Darnielle did not know what this meant, but he knew that it was definitely not a good thing. Xueqi had indeed almost died, if not for the system elf constantly scanning the surroundings for him. Why did mages need a large number of followers? The powerful firepower of the mages formed a stark contrast with their weak vitality. If he didn't have a magic shield or an ice shield, even if the weakest militia stabbed him with their pitchforks, Pharaoh would still die. This forced mages to keep their distance when fighting against warriors. It was already very difficult for Xueqi to deal with two chieftain-level heroes. Those two superhuman fellows were simply unreasonable. But an even more unreasonable fellow was yet to come. The system elf had given him the highest level of warning. A huge red exclamation mark appeared on Xueqi's retina, pointing straight to the left side of the mountain. It was a series of footprints that were very, very far away. If it wasn't for the system elf special marking, Xueqi wouldn't have realized that this was a series of footprints made by a single person, because each footprint was at least 10 meters apart. There was no one in his field of vision, but the system elf used a simple and direct method to outline a sturdy human figure with a red frame. And this figure was approaching Xueqi at high speed. "Ha!" Xueqi shouted, and with a wave of his left hand, an ice tornado filled with freezing air suddenly swept towards the seemingly empty space. A burly human figure was forced to appear in the air. An orc sword saint. This was an orc with a crimson flag on his back, a large brown-black strange bead around his neck, a white beard fluttering in the wind, and a long single-edged sword in his hand. Xueqi recognized who he was at a glance. Samuro. He was an orc born in the Orc Fireblade clan with unparalleled martial arts. In history, he had experienced the First and Second War at the Dark Portal. Samuro was an expert in stealth, and his stealth skills were displayed to the extreme in the Battle of the Elven Forest not long ago. 34 commanders of the Stormwind Kingdom had lost their lives in his hands, including 2 generals and 1 deputy commander. The Fireblade clan was a famous sword saint clan among the orcs, and this clan had given birth to countless sword saints. Unparalleled combat talent, agility, and destructive power were incomparable to ordinary warriors. Almost all orc warriors had an inexplicable admiration for the sword saints. The moment Samuro's figure appeared, the orc army that was still unyielding and trying to get close to Xueqi let out a thunderous cheer. This cheer seemed to make Kilrog Deadeye lose his composure. With a fierce roar, his body grew by a full 30 centimeters. If Orgrim was said to have transformed into a berserker, then Kilrog was said to have increased his speed and magic resistance. The effect of the freezing air from the blizzard had on him was reduced by 70% in an instant. Samuro's figure disappeared into the air again. Without a doubt, he must have activated the invisibility effect of Gale Step, and pounced towards Xueqi. In an instant, the famous heroes of the 3 tribes charged over together. "Boss!" Darnielle called out in a questioning tone. In the plan that had been set before, Xueqi was to run after setting the fire. But when to run was still Xueqi's call. Xueqi knew very well that in a one-on-one situation, he would be at an absolute disadvantage against any one of the 3 horde heroes. Xueqi couldn't understand the physique of the orc hero that could increase his magic resistance no matter how hard he scratched his head. Was this the 20% mutation in the world that didn't match Xueqi's impression? Or was it the level suppression brought by the orc hero? This was a very serious question. It was related to whether Xueqi would take a detour when he saw the horde heroes in the future, or find a way to kill them directly. Heroes couldn't be replicated. Heroes with leadership abilities were even fewer if they were killed. At this point in time, before the appearance of the first-generation paladin, the humans really only had one Anduin Lothar to support the horde, which was full of fierce warriors. In fact, before Bolvar for Dragon became a paladin, Bolvar's strength was only second-rate. If possible, Xueqi still wanted to see if he could kill 1 or 2 horde heroes. At the very least, he wanted to find out if their abilities were different from what he remembered. Duke stretched out both of his hands, as though he was pushing open an abnormally heavy door. When he completely opened his hands, his entire body spread out, and an incomparably huge cover, with a blizzard constantly revolving around it, appeared impressively on the entire mountain top. When a mage's ice barrier was expanded 100 times with the support of unimaginable magic power, what would it look like? The answer was the ice barrier. In front of him. An enemy that entered the barrier would be affected by a certain speed reduction effect and a certain chance of being frozen into ice. Chapter 164. The situation in front of them made the 3 tribal heroes frown. Enter? Or not enter? This was a serious problem. Enter? The blizzards and tornadoes inside were not to be trifled with. Looking at those sharp icicles spinning non-stop, anyone would have goosebumps. Not enter? Tens of thousands of tribal elites were watching. Great Chief Blackhand had even given a death order. No matter how many people died, they had to tear this human mage into pieces. Retreat! Samuro, Kilrog, and Orgrim, who had reappeared, looked at each other. Unexpectedly, it was the Orc Sword Saint who made the first move. Abandoning the invisibility effect of Gale Step, the Orc Sword Saint jumped directly into Duque's huge ice shield that was more than 100 meters in diameter. He waved his long sword and began to spin violently. Samuro's wild eyes were filled with endless killing intent. Duque must die. Any human who dared to challenge the glory of the tribe must die. They must use the most tragic blood sacrifice to pay tribute to their compatriots who were burned to death by magic flames. The sword flashes were dazzling. The unparalleled spinning sword flashes were like a whirlwind, turning into a storm in a very short time. It was a tornado made of sword energy. The damage of the terrifying sword flashes even exceeded the reach of swords and knives, forming a sword energy that continuously cut at Duque's shield. Darnielle held the flag behind Duque in shock and muttered to himself, "What skill is this?" Bladestorm, the signature skill of the Fireblade clan Sword Saint. Duque sneered. Duque could almost close his eyes and write down the Sword Saint's combat skills. If this is all you have, then go to hell. Yes. Duque had his eyes on Samuro. Unlike Kilrog and Orgrim, who had powerful physiques, Samuro was indeed powerful. The biggest difference was that Samuro was an assassin, while those two cockroach-like fellows were warriors. From a certain point of view, the Sword Saint was similar to a mage. They both had the strongest attack and destructive power, but their bodies were extremely weak. No, the Sword Saint was even more extreme. After increasing his speed and attack power, the Sword Saint only had mirror image as a life-saving skill. He relied on the many doppelgangers to confuse the enemy. Duque was least afraid of mirror images. With a system elf scan, Duque would always be able to tell which was the real body and which was the original in the shortest amount of time. Of course, Duque had a simpler and more violent method. In the next second, he abruptly raised his left hand high up. After his left hand snapped his fingers in an extremely pretentious manner, his left hand suddenly swung down to the left. This was a new move that was created by combining Dasong's Freezing Hell and Ice Ring, Rapid Avalanche. With a wave of his arm, the entire area within the ice barrier, apart from Duque, Darnielle, and the area 10 meters in diameter behind them, was instantly frozen. In the beginning, Sacred Swordmaster Samuro wanted to rely on his high-speed rotation to withstand the cold air. However, he immediately discovered that his rotation was becoming slower and slower, and his movements were becoming more and more sluggish. He was like a spinning top that was about to lose all its kinetic energy. Not good. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he could kill Samuro in a second. When Duque opened his right hand and made a clenching gesture, he was about to use a giant ice hand that appeared out of nowhere to grab Samuro and crush him to death. That was when Orgrim made his move. The giant square-headed hammer of destruction came crashing down, and a crack in the lava that could be seen with the naked eye blasted through Duque's ice barrier. Coincidentally, it allowed the violent heat to enter Samuro's blade storm that was about to stop in the next second. After the high temperature was transmitted, Samuro suddenly had enough energy to resist Duque's cold air. The blade storm that had almost stopped once again displayed its shocking destructive power. The high-speed rotating blades brought with them an extremely high temperature that was enough to evaporate all the water in the surrounding air. They actually ate away at least a quarter of Duque's barrier in an instant. Duque's face darkened. I knew that hammer of destruction wasn't some blue-quality item that was sold at a roadside stall. Duque cursed. As Orgrim's famous weapon, Hammer of Destruction, was never a nameless weapon. After being immersed in lava all year round, Hammer of Destruction had an extremely exaggerated fire elemental energy. However, Hammer of Destruction wasn't at its peak yet. Just like Lothar's King's Sword, when a certain weapon condensed the will and faith of millions of people in an entire race. Even if that weapon itself was made of ordinary iron, it would be upgraded to at least the level of a demigod weapon. Not to mention that Hammer of Destruction itself wasn't an ordinary weapon. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that after becoming the chief of the tribe, Orgrim's strength would at least double. In the next moment, Kilrog charged over. With two short axes that were less than half a meter long in his hands, Kilrog Deadeye immediately turned into a berserker. His axes carried some kind of strange power. Every time he swung them at high speed, they could actually reduce the frost aura in Xueqi's barrier at a high speed. Xueqi's already darkened face became even darker, not much better than the bottom of a pot. F***CK. All of the Horde's heroes are F***king perverts. I'm not going to play with you anymore. Darnielle, let's go. A real B***TCH should be one with the B***TCH, using the B***TCH to hurt people from thousands of miles away. When the three Horde heroes revealed their trump cards, Xueqi immediately realized that this was only part of their trump cards. It was still too early for him to kill them. That was why Xueqi ran away without saying a word. He grabbed Darnielle and retreated. Because they were looking up from the mountainside, the three Horde heroes were shocked to find that Xueqi had actually hidden a griffin not far behind him. He had no intention of fighting to the death with the Horde heroes. Xueqi turned around and rode on the griffin behind him. The griffin did not understand why Xueqi suddenly wanted to leave when he was in the middle of a good fight. However, it was well trained. After sensing the movement of its temporary master, the griffin let out a long cry of dissatisfaction and flew up. Duke Marcus. If you're still a man, come down and fight me one-on-one. Seeing that Xueqi wanted to run, Orgrim was almost driven mad. He could not imagine why the seemingly powerful human mage would have the idea of running away. Didn't he already suppress all three of them? Orgrim, if you're still a man, come to Storm Fort and fight me one-on-one in front of 100,000 human soldiers. A bunch of Horde heroes coming at me together, and you still have the nerve to say one-on-one? The griffin climbed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, Xueqi had risen to a height of 30 meters. Being countered by Xueqi's orc language, Orgrim was speechless. Xueqi was right. All three of them were famous heroes in the Horde. Just as Xueqi was about to escape, a mournful whistling sound came from afar and approached at high speed. Chapter 165. Bullet time. Was a ridiculous thing, but with the help of the system elf, Xueqi managed to do it. The time around him suddenly slowed down 100 times, and the thing that had almost reached the speed of sound was finally reflected in Xueqi's retina under the almost stagnant time. It was a strange, huge single-edged axe. The edge of the axe looked like a huge hook, or an elephant's trunk. There were not many axes like this in the world of Azeroth, but they were definitely not few either. Considering that the person who threw the axe was at least 100 meters away from Xueqi, it was impossible for someone to throw an axe like this from 100 meters away. And from 100 meters away, he was able to throw an axe in such an inhumane manner. When he threw it, it let out a terrifying shriek that could shatter one's soul, as well as a terrifying power that could split the heavens and split the earth. There was only one name for this axe: Bloodhowl. An ordinary axe was obviously not worth Xueqi's surprise. This Bloodhowl was the most important part of its owner's reputation. Grom Hellhowl. Even though Xueqi was a human and was destined to join the Alliance in the future, he could not help but respect this hero of the Horde. Looking in the direction where the axe was thrown, with the help of the system, a burly figure was marked out by a red border. As a veteran player, Xueqi recognized Grom at a glance. He had braided hair, which was rare among orcs. His black hair was parted in the middle, and he had a ferocious trapezoidal face. He also had a shoulder guard on his right shoulder, and a belt with a skull pattern across his chest. His brown body was covered with muscles that contained an unimaginable explosive power. He even maintained the gesture of throwing the axe. Grom Hellhowl was famous because he was the first orc to be bewitched by Gul'dan and drink the blood of the Abyssal Lord Manaroth. This caused the dark brown orc's skin to turn green, and they gained the power to invade the world of Azeroth. As the chief of the Warsong tribe, one of the most powerful orc clans, Grom's strength was definitely top-notch. In the second battle of the Dark Portal in history, the axe of Grom, who was responsible for guarding the Dark Portal, was stained with the blood of human warriors. He had killed as many as 48 famous and powerful knights. His greatest achievement in history was when he sacrificed himself and cooperated with Thrall to kill the Lord of the Abyss, Manaroth, who had harmed the orcs. Xueqi had never imagined that Grom Hellscream, who hadn't participated in the first battle at the Dark Portal, would actually come to ambush him. History had once again reached a turning point. At this moment, Xueqi felt as if his spiritual sea had frozen. Seeing something didn't mean you could do it. Xueqi's scalp went numb. From bullet time, which had slowed down the flow of time, He saw the starting point of the axe and the ending point of the axe, his back. However, there was no way for Xueqi to dodge this sure-kill attack. Speed up, deceleration, left and right dodging, block. In that instant, the system genie helped Xueqi simulate what would happen next thousands of times in his mind. But Xueqi couldn't escape even once. This had nothing to do with technique. This was an attack that had completely surpassed the boundaries of martial arts, physics, and science. It felt as if this was the kind of attack that was guaranteed to hit, and the process of making up for the hit itself was a completely unreasonable attack that went against the laws of karma. Lothar was the king's sword that had gathered the will and faith of humans for more than 1,000 years. Grom's axe toss had also gathered all the spirit, energy, and spirit of this sword saint, who was also from the Fireblade clan, as well as the wild and unparalleled will of the 100,000 warriors of the clan. The orcs will never be slaves. Grom Hellscream's classic roar seemed to echo in Xueqi's ears. In this spinning axe, Xueqi saw an illusion. He saw the struggle of the orcs on the land of Draenor for thousands of years. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. The orcs became the masters of the land of Draenor with their wild and unyielding will. Now that Draenor was heading towards destruction, the orcs saw Azeroth as the next stop for the orcs to reproduce and continue because of the collusion between Gul'dan and Sargeras. There was no compromise, no fluke. At this moment, Xueqi finally realized that even though he was a mage, sometimes he had to fight for real. "Ha!" Xueqi yelled. At this time, Darnielle, who was helping to steer the griffin, was scared out of his wits when he realized that 20 meters behind him, there was an incomparably huge axe cleaving through the air. Suddenly, 12 magic formations and 36 hands of magic appeared not far in front of the griffin's left. Darnielle's mouth was wide open in shock, and he didn't even realize that the strong wind brought by the high-speed flight was pouring into his mouth, causing his face to swell and become very funny. Multicasting and mobile casting were two special metamagic abilities that many mages couldn't train for a lifetime. Not everyone could calm down while moving at high speed, let every incantation enter the spirit sea, and use magic power to activate them in the correct order. Not to mention multicasting of mobile casting. Even if Xueqi cast his magic silently, it was still an inconceivable thing for mortals. It was like a person running at the speed of a 100-meter race and reciting 48 different ancient poems of more than 100 words in his mind at the same time without slowing down. Was this done by a human? But Xueqi did it with the help of the system elf. Not only Darnielle, but Orgrim, Kilrog and Samuro, who were watching Gromhell roar nervously from below, as well as the great chief Blackhand not far away, and thousands of orcs all witnessed this spectacle. The gorgeous formation that suddenly appeared in the sky was like a miracle depicted in epics. Arcane impact. Fell with a loud bang. It wasn't the messy kind of torrential rain, but a kind of strange rhythm, a very regular and accurate shot. Bang! 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 In a very short time, dozens of arcane impact spells fell on the spinning axe blade. Each strike less than 1/50th of a second apart. But each strike hit the same position on the left of the spinning axe blade that was constantly changing position in the air. From left to right, the arcane impact on the 12 magic formations blasted out, and the 36 hands of magic also blasted out arcane bullets. Unknowingly, the great blood roar had been led astray. Chapter 166. Gromhell's scream roared as he widened his bell-sized eyes. His bloodshot eyes were filled with disbelief. Unlike the other boorish beast men, Grom came from the Fireblade clan, which emphasized technique, willpower, and will the most. This clan produced many sword saints, and their battle philosophy was different from most of the beast men. Grom clearly knew that the strike he had absolute confidence in had been led astray. The slightest error could lead to a huge difference. The slight deviation was accumulating, and the miraculous combo was transmitted back to him from the blood roar that was connected to his mind. Even if there was a 10-foot thick wall in front of him, Grom was confident that he could break through it and land the axe on the enemy's back. He had miscalculated. This mysterious human wizard that he had never met before had shocking techniques that left him in awe. Even though he was watching from afar, he could understand what Xueqi had done. The axe, which was powerful enough to split a mountain and split the earth, felt like it was chopping paper. Every layer of paper slightly weakened the power of the axe. Bit by bit, like water dripping through a stone. However, Xueqi's method was even more extreme, and many times more precise. The 3-digit mid-tier spell combo had caused the fatal blow to deviate. Sigh. Grom Hellscream roared as he let out a long sigh. The sigh was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Grom, who never lost confidence, suddenly felt an irresistible sense of helplessness. In order to win, he had poured the willpower of his entire clan into Bloodroar. It felt like it had forcefully twisted the cause and effect of fate. However, his opponent had easily brought fate back to its original path. Just like how water flowed downwards, the sun would always rise after a long night, and the year was divided into 4 seasons. This axe, if you say it will hit, it doesn't count. If I say it won't, then it won't. As countless orcs looked up, the famous Bloodroar finally deviated from its original path and brushed past Xueqi less than half a meter away from him. The griffin Xueqi was so shocked that it lost a few feathers, and Darnielle was so scared that he almost peed his pants. However, they did not cause any real damage to the detestable Duke Marcus. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. The griffin flew higher and higher. In just a few breaths, it had already soared into the clouds, turning into a small black that was almost invisible to the naked eye. It only left the bitter orcs with a string of wild and arrogant laughter. Almost every orc's face was black. Perhaps it was because of the smoke, or perhaps it was simply because his face was black. There was such an earth-shattering explosion 1,000 meters away. There were raging flames, thick smoke, and clearly audible screams. It would be strange if the human guards on the outer walls of Stormwind City could not hear or see it. Looking at the griffin descending from the clouds again, looking at Xueqi's iconic wizard robe on the griffin, the defenders could not help but let out deafening cheers. Well done, Earl Marcus. Kill those green-skinned people. Burn, burn, burn. It's better to burn them all to death. Sir Marcus, you are our patron saint. Xueqi let Darnielle drive the griffin and fly slowly over the outer walls. Every time he raised his hand, a louder cheer would be aroused. Lothar flew over with a small group of griffin knights. This Azeroth Prince of Dreams had wavy black hair fluttering in the wind. Before he got close, his loud, lion-like laughter could be heard. Ha ha ha. Well done, Xueqi. Hey! I almost lost my life there. A few of the chiefs in the tribe probably hate me to the core. It's fine. Even if you were really trapped there, I'm sure I can bring people to rescue you. Looking at Lothar's large hemp rope with a slip knot on the griffin's butt, Xueqi rolled his eyes. Damn it, Lothar actually meant what he said. When the time comes, will you rope me like a western cowboy, hang me by the neck and pull me up? TCH. If it weren't for you, Lang wouldn't have allowed me to dispatch all the griffin knights. Xueqi suddenly felt a burst of warmth in his heart. A line of griffins flew to the inner city wall of Stormwind City, near the flight point on the east side. The griffins spread their huge wings and began to slow down. After a few flaps, their sharp claws made a sharp sound on the thick hay. Before the griffin came to a stop, Lothar had already nimbly flipped over. But there was one person faster than Lothar, Storm King Lang. How was the battle? Lang asked impatiently. It's fine, the beast men will get lost for the time being. Are you sure? Lang's face was filled with undisguised surprise. Of course. Xueqi's voice rose an octave. Not only did I burn most of their tents, but I also added some seasoning to their only water source. Seasoning. Almost at the same time, the great chief of the tribe, Blackhand, could almost be renamed to Blackface. Report, the water source has been poisoned? Poisoned? How can running water be poisoned? Beside him, Kilrog angrily asked the captain of Blackhand's bodyguards. I don't know. But the water flowing down from the mountains is green. My men have personally confirmed that the beasts will die after drinking it. Someone saw Naga in the water. It should be the human Naga who poisoned it. Wasn't there a water bar blocking it? Orgrim asked. It was blown up by that human mage. It was too chaotic just now. None of us noticed. The few tribe leaders fell silent at the same time. At first, the elven forest was filled with murlocs and Naga, attacking the orc laborers who were fetching water from the river. But Orgrim came up with an idea, which was to build a crude dam to prevent the Naga and murlocs from entering the forest. After a few attempts by the Naga to bypass the dam and enter the water, they were ambushed by the orcs. Almost no Naga could be seen in the elven forest. They didn't expect to be ambushed by Xueqi, allowing the Naga to enter the forest. Now, all the trees that could provide shade had been burned down by Xueqi, and the only water source had been polluted. There weren't tens of thousands of people here. If there were only a few of them, they could slowly dig deep wells. The problem was that there were 300,000 soldiers here. The orcs were very brave warriors, but they weren't undead. They needed to eat, drink, and defecate too. Without water, this was definitely a very serious problem. Black Hand was very violent, but he hadn't completely lost his mind. The word was stuck in his throat a few times before it popped out from between his teeth. Retreat! On the other side, a deafening roar came from the direction of the city gate, spreading throughout Stormwind City. Every soldier in the city raised their heads in confusion, looking at the outer city wall in confusion. Not long after, a messenger immediately shouted as he galloped on his horse. Victory! Victory! Sky Mage Earl Duke Marcus ambushed the orc camp, burning over 10,000 orcs to death. Now the orcs are retreating from the south gate. Chapter 167. The crowd involuntarily became even more restless. The black flames of the distant fire soared into the sky, and could be clearly seen even across the high city walls. Originally, no one knew that it was Xueqi who had set the fire, but when the messenger said so, the crowd immediately went from restless to seething. Long live Stormwind! Long live His Majesty Lang! Long live His Excellency Marcus! The people were simple and honest. Whoever could bring them a safe and happy life would be their god and heaven. Since the start of the War of the Dark Portal, the kingdom had been retreating on all fronts. The Red Ridge Mountain had fallen. Half of the Twilight Forest had fallen. Not long ago, the Elven Forest, the core area that the kingdom was most proud of, had fallen into the hands of the cruel and terrifying beast men. The most unbearable thing was that the green-skinned devils had invaded the city yesterday. The people were in a state of panic, and they unknowingly lost their trust in the king and even the kingdom. It was at this time that the news of Xueqi's great victory suddenly came, like a clear spring, washing away the haze in people's hearts. This timely victory was tantamount to a cardiac stimulant, and it very well restored the confidence of the army and civilians. The retreat of the tribe, even if it was temporary, made the sword of Damocles hanging above their heads move a little. This was how people were. Even though they vaguely knew that they were still lingering near the gates of hell, as long as they did not see it with their own eyes, the threat would not be so obvious. See King Xueqi. The hero Xueqi. The kingdom's new guardian Xueqi. Duke Marcus' reputation was spreading like wildfire in a variety of ways. In the next few days, Xueqi rode a griffin and set fire all over the Elven Forest. A dignified sky wizard became an arsonist. This was an inconceivable thing for a wizard who prided himself on being noble. There were voices of opposition, but in the face of the amazing results, such voices quickly disappeared without a trace. Firstly, Xueqi had the absolute support of the king. Secondly, the talents of the royal family's wizard corps had withered, and the only Morning Star wizard was only acting as the king's bodyguard. No one had the right to criticize Xueqi, who had appeared as the hero who had killed Sargeras. Xueqi's fire was effective. The term scorching summer was not an exaggeration. The dry forest was set ablaze almost at the slightest touch. A few fireballs in the upwind direction would turn into a forest fire that was almost impossible to extinguish. If it wasn't for Orgrim's suggestion, the beast men would have suffered even greater losses. Xueqi was ruthless enough to set fire to the forest. This was something Orgrim didn't expect. The continuous fire stirred up thick smoke that covered the sky, almost turning the entire forest into a flaming hell. Except for the areas where the trees had been cut down long ago, or the lakes and rivers in the Elven Forest, all the trees had been burned by Xueqi. The problem that followed almost drove the leaders of the tribe crazy. "We're out of food." Orgrim was the first to speak during the tribal chieftains' meeting. Warriors of the tribe fought against 3 humans on the battlefield. It was the same for their appetite. The violent beast men weren't like the weak humans in their eyes, who could survive on bread. To maintain their burly physique, large amounts of meat were essential. The hunters of the tribe had to go deep into the forest every day to kill large numbers of animals. Unlike the old orc Draenor, there weren't many large or even gigantic creatures in the Elven Forest. Wild boars, gnolls, and even captured murlocs had all become food for the beast men. Anything larger than a squirrel in the forest had been hunted down. They didn't realize it when their territory was expanding rapidly, but now that their attacks had stopped and the forest was suddenly set on fire, These fellows who were 99% muscle-brained finally realized the severity of the problem. "Aren't we learning how to rear pigs?" Black Hand asked in a muffled voice. "Pigs don't grow up in a day." Orgrim didn't think much of Black Hand's brainlessness before, but now he felt that having a tribal chieftain like this was like riding a giant wolf rushing to hell. All the chieftains looked at Black Hand, waiting for him to make a decision. As the first tribal chieftain of the tribe, Black Hand wasn't a very smart person. Or rather, Gul'dan had purposely chosen Black Hand to make it easier for him to control him. Similarly, in the tribe, it was usually the bravest and most capable of fighting who became the chieftain. And the smartest ones were mostly the shamans in the tribe. But now, the shaman profession was on the decline, and the warlocks that replaced it were mysterious and sneaky. Recently, all the warlocks in the Shadow Council had disappeared. Black Hand really couldn't come up with a plan if he suddenly asked him to. Unwittingly, Black Hand turned to look at his most trusted aide, Orgrim Doomhammer. At that moment, the anger in Orgrim's heart burned 1,000 times stronger. He had had enough. He had had enough of this Shadow Council chief who killed his good friend, Durotan, and his wife. He had had enough of this reckless chief who didn't care about the lives of the tribe's warriors. He had had enough of this brainless and irresponsible Black Hand. Orgrim made up his mind. After the Horde survived this crisis, he would follow the tradition of the other clans and challenge the great chief Black Hand for the position of chief, Makara. He would kill this puppet of the Shadow Council in a duel, and then take care of the Shadow Council. But Duke's ruthless and effective magic attacks left a deep impression on Orgrim. Only a mystic could deal with a mystic. Should he kill Gul'dan and his warlocks? For the first time, Orgrim hesitated. But he had to solve the crisis in front of him first. Orgrim pointed to the north on the military map he got from the humans. "We don't need so many warriors to take down this small Stormwind city. Chieftain, I suggest we split up. In this place called Iron Furnace Castle, there is another kind of weak and short humanoid creatures called dwarves. Since the tribe wants to be the master of this land, we shouldn't let any of the other powers go." Black Hand and the other tribal chieftains' eyes lit up. When they first arrived at Azeroth, the tribe was completely clueless. They didn't know where they were, how many enemies they had, or where they were. Even though Gul'dan emphasized the weakness of the enemies, and in reality, these weak enemies were no match for them. But the tribe was still in a state of ignorance about where to attack and how many people to send. After killing a lot of humans and seizing the maps, the chieftains finally learned more information. Now, Orgrim's suggestion had undoubtedly pointed them in a brighter direction. Chapter 168. There were hundreds of thousands of Horde warriors. There was no need for so many soldiers to take down this small human kingdom. Furthermore, Orgrim had already used his actions to find the enemy's weak point, the low city wall in the valley. Spreading out was also a way of survival for the beast men since ancient times. Now that there was a shortage of food, there was no reason to gather so many soldiers here. The problem was, who was going to attack the dwarves? Creatures in the natural world often had the instinct to judge the strength of their opponents based on their size. The beast men generally looked down on the short humans who only reached the beastmen's chests. Not to mention the dwarves who only reached the beastmen's waists. To the beastmen, getting rid of those dwarves who were not even comparable to beastmen children was a matter of minutes. Thus, the beastmen chief saw this as a lucrative position. For a moment, every chief's eyes were filled with eagerness. If he stayed here, he would receive a victory. Unfortunately, the chief Black Hand and the main force he led were here. This meant that the greatest glory and benefits would definitely belong to the Blackrock clan. The other clans could only follow behind and watch as the Blackrock clan ate the meat, while their own clans drank some of the meat soup. Going out was different. Risk. When was there no risk in survival? In our world, the beast men called themselves Draenor. Every hunt was a fight with their lives on the line. In the eyes of the beast men, risk was not a problem. Every chief unknowingly took a step forward. Black Hand squinted his eyes and used his limited brain capacity to think. Very quickly, the chief made a decision. "Kill Rog. I'll give you the glory of conquering Iron Furnace Castle. I hope your Bloodring clan can bring glory to our tribe." For the tribe. Kilrog Deadeye punched himself in the chest, causing a loud bang. The old orc hero's face was blazing with excitement. Black Hand turned around and looked at Grom Inferno, who had rushed over at the last moment before the dark portal closed. He roared, "Your Warsong clan will head north and conquer this kingdom called Torrential Stronghold." Hee. My bloodhowl has been hungry for a long time. Grom's lips curled up, revealing a bloodthirsty smile. Black hands slammed the rough wooden table, instantly turning a corner into splinters. "Other clans, prepare yourselves. We will directly cross the mountain and attack the eastern wall of Stormwind City." Blackhand and Orgrim's idea was a good one. Unfortunately, dreams were plentiful, but reality was harsh. The Horde spent 11 days getting the orc laborers to dig wells along the way to clear the obstacles in the way of the army's advance. Once again, Orgrim and the orc army behind him were dumbfounded as they traversed the mountains with ease. Blackhand grabbed Orgrim's neck and roared, "Is this what you meant by weak defense?" The city wall was still the same 5-meter-tall wall that blocked the orcs' view, but in front of the wall, not only were there many barbicans like the one outside the main gate of Stormwind City, but there was also a 5-meter-wide moat. Not only that, but there were also many huge mounds of earth behind the city walls. The flat tops of the mounds were filled with all kinds of catapults and ballistae. Dozens of arrow towers stood tall, and the javelin throwers on them could easily cover the area beyond the moat. Ha ha ha! Those green-skinned beasts must be dumbfounded. On the arrow tower, Noxus looked at the hesitant Horde army and laughed happily. Beside him, Lang also smiled sincerely. "It's all thanks to you, Duque. If it wasn't for your idea, we might have been finished." Duque shrugged. "It's nothing. The more people, the easier it is. You don't have to be humble. You're my lucky star." Lang smiled. A simple city defense could not withstand the orcs' flood of attacks. Therefore, as a transmigrator, Duque used the more people, the easier it is trick to deal with the orcs. It was simple. Those who were willing to dig the moat for the kingdom, as long as they dug enough earth, could get an early ticket to board the ship. The people went crazy. Everyone knew that Stormwind City could not hold on for much longer. The longer they stayed, the higher the chance of death. If not for the fact that they were surrounded and the sea was the only way out, the people would have rioted and fled on a large scale. Many people at the docks thought of ways and used up all their money just to get an early ticket. Don't talk nonsense like everyone was equal. The truth was that the more capable and the more capital one had, the more likely one could escape. Didn't they see that the nobles no longer had to go through the civilian docks? They could just board the new ships of the Stormwind Navy at the military port and easily escape from this desperate Stormwind City? But now, Duque's policy gave these pessimistic people new hope. As long as they worked hard, they could save themselves and their friends in advance. The conditions were not harsh. The laborers dug under the cover of the Stormwind soldiers who were ready for battle. Digging 20 standard carriages of earth could be exchanged for a ticket. A strong worker who spared no effort to work for a day or two could basically guarantee 3 to 4 tickets on the ship. Just like that, Duke did not even need to pay. With safety as a bargaining chip, he easily added hundreds of barbicans of various sizes around the eastern and northern walls of Stormwind City. Then, he built a sluice gate and connected it to the canals within Stormwind City, creating a moat on the outermost perimeter of the outer walls. Although everything looked so rough and full of flaws, it was many times better than the original 5-meter-tall city wall. Duque looked at Edwin Van Cleef, who had deep dark circles under his eyes. He did not know if he had slept for more than 10 hours. Duque smiled warmly and patted Van Cleef's shoulder. "Good job, Edwin." "Master, you flatter me." Van Cleef hurriedly lowered his head. "I'll leave the transport ship, Sea God, to you and your stonemason. Pack your things and wait for me in South Shore." Van Cleef's eyes turned red. "Master, Duque stopped Van Cleef from continuing. "It's time to fight. That's not the domain of stonemasons. You go first. The Stormwind refugees near South Shore are still waiting for you to build a house." After hesitating for half a second, Van Cleef looked up. "But I'm a man too. I can fight too." Duque snickered. "How many orcs can you fight? If you want to act cool in front of Anju and Lothar, you should at least become a professional, right?" I. Van Cleef's eyes were red and filled with tears. "Go, your lovely Vanessa is waiting for you." Duque's words struck the softest part of the heart of this tragic hero, who had risen up for the stonemasons. He suddenly knelt on one knee. "Thank you, master." Chapter 169. At Stormwind Port, Van Cleef's eyes reddened when he saw the huge Poseidon ship moored in the harbor. There was a large sign on the dock that read, "Exclusively used by the Stonemason Guild," and Count Duque's personal guards. Count Duke Marcus' reputation had seeped into the hearts of every citizen of Stormwind. His courage, wisdom, fairness, benevolence, and greatness had almost become holy. People began to put his name alongside King Lang and Anduin Lothar. No matter where they were, the private guards of Count Marcus who wore the emblem of the 100-armed god of death would receive the most solemn treatment, equivalent to that of a knight. All the chaotic scenes would become orderly after the arrival of Duque's private guards. This was prestige. This was the people's spontaneous worship of Duque. While Van Cleef and the other stonemasons stayed behind to work, many wanted to sell their lives to Stormwind as the price for sending their families away early. Who would have thought that Duque would actually send them away? There was no way they would be killed when they were already dead. Before leaving, Makarov, the butler of Duque's external affairs, personally delivered the construction plans of the South Shore refugee camp. This made it clear to Van Cleef and his brothers that there were still many areas where they could be of use. Here is the money needed to build the houses. Makarov's men carried over 50 chests of gold coins. If this is not enough, you can also use your signature to withdraw up to 300,000 gold coins from the Sea King Merchant Guild branch in Kurtiras and Menethil Port. Master, does he trust me that much? Makarov smiled. Master Marcus said that he saw your eyes, and they told him that you are the kind of person who will do anything for the people, for your brothers, even sacrificing yourself. He believes in your character. 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks, and Van Cleef wailed like a child. Makarov patted Van Cleef's shoulder. Do well. Master said that the rebuilding of New Stormwind will depend on you. Van Cleef looked up in a daze. Will we retake Stormwind? I will. Because Master himself said, Stormwind City will be destroyed, but Stormwind City is destined to be reborn. Master Duke Marcus is synonymous with miracles. If he can't do it, who can? That's right. If Duque couldn't do it, who could? At the age of 14, he declared that he had surpassed the world guardian Mediv at that time. Before the age of 15, he had become one of the richest merchants in Stormwind and even the 7 human kingdoms. In the same year, he risked his life to follow Anduin Lothar to launch a surprise attack on Karazhan, sending the boss of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, into the bottomless abyss. Not long ago, he had summoned endless heavenly fire on his griffin alone, burning 100,000 orcs to death with a single fire. Well, it's necessary for publicity. Poor Darnielle was ignored, and the number of orcs killed in battle was exaggerated by 10 times. Anyway, when the orcs retreated in a hurry, Lothar asked his men to pick up thousands of charred orc corpses to show to the public, and the people decisively believed it. Who is the miracle? Duque himself was a miracle. For a moment, Van Cleef's heart was filled with blood. If you want to act cool in front of Anduin Lothar, you should at least become a professional, right? Duque's words still echoed in Van Cleef's ears. Van Cleef clenched his fists tightly, and he made a decision. Become a professional. Not just a stonemason, but also a strong person to guard Master's side. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the cabin. This was a critical time. Makarov and Van Cleef immediately looked towards the direction of the sound. It was the direction of Stormwind's military port. Due to the needs of the war, the port had been constantly expanding. The northernmost berthing of the civilian port was already very close to the military port, so they could clearly see what was happening at the military port dozens of meters away. All of you, get off the ship. There's no extra space on the ship for filthy people like you. Seeing the filthy people that the noble was talking about, Makarov and Van Cleef's eyes widened. Those were the navy of Stormwind. Why were the owners of the ship being chased off? This is the Royal Navy's ship. The first mate on the ship waved his fist angrily. Not for now. The noble with the Count's medal arrogantly raised his hand, and immediately a person who looked like a butler walked forward. Makarov recognized him. He was Count Christian Ferens, whom Windsor had rescued from Karazhan a while ago. F***CK. He really F***King saved a scourge back. And he actually treated these scum like they were his king. At this moment, Makarov was cursing Windsor in his heart for being so meddlesome. Summon the Imperial Order of King Lang Rin. From the 8th of this month, Jacob is responsible for transporting Duke Ferens and his personal belongings to South Shore. There was nothing wrong with the order itself. In fact, it was already a great gift from Lang to have the navy ship free to transport the nobles. But the king's order was obviously amplified by someone. In order to transport more of their own people, as well as their family heirlooms and valuables, the nobles actually threw the entire navy off the ship. The cabins that originally belonged to the navy were all filled with treasures, guards, servants, and maids. A navy officer suppressed his anger. Then your safety will not be guaranteed. I don't need you lousy temporary sailors. My men can handle this ship just fine. They are sailors with rich experience in long-distance voyages. The arrogance of the nobles was vividly displayed by Count Christian Ferens at this moment. Bullshit. How can a navy ship be the same as a civilian ship? The navy's lungs were about to explode. But they did not dare to do anything. The one who came out was Count Christian Ferens. But this count's father was the famous Duke Ferens. At the peak of his power, the Ferens family owned 1/5 of the Elven Forest as their territory. They were one of the oldest nobles in Stormwind. How will the ship come back? Jacob still has a mission to evacuate people from Stormwind in 5 days. Count Christian raised his chin and did not even lift his eyelids. Go to South Shore. I will order the soldiers there to bring the ship back. After saying that, he no longer paid attention to the naval officers and disappeared from the cabin, leaving only 8 fierce-looking guards lined up in a row, blocking the cabin entrance. Arrogant, condescending, and proud of being born noble. Why were there heroes like Anduin Lothar and Duke Marcus among the nobles? And why is it full of scum like Christian Ferens? Chapter 170. Although Edwin Van Cleef was young, and had not yet crossed the line between youth and middle age of 30, as a steward of the Masons' Guild, his soul had suffered setbacks countless times, over and over again. This was not the first time Edwin had tasted the arrogance and stinginess of the nobles. Perhaps he had spent a lot of money on a priceless stone sculpture, but refused to pay the rest because a butler said, his lordship does not like it. In reality, the rest of the money was pocketed by someone, and the stonemason who had paid for the expensive materials fell into bankruptcy. When a request from the nobles came again, there was no way to refuse. Work, or be persecuted to death. King Lang was wise and great. He was like the sun, giving light to the people. But there were places in the world where the sun could not shine, and the golden signboard of the nobles was the perfect prop. The nobles could wantonly exploit the people of the lower classes without paying any price. Edwin's extremely sensitive ears could still hear the voice coming from behind him. All citizens with valid tickets, listen up. Everyone is only allowed to bring no more than 10 pounds of personal belongings. Do not worry, everyone will be given enough bread and water every day from the time the ship sets sail to South Shore. In addition, the king has already prepared enough food for everyone in South Shore. Who did not have some beloved items? Limiting the amount of belongings they could bring was a helpless measure to transport more citizens. Everyone understood and understood. In this chaotic time of war, everyone was already very grateful to Duque and King Lang for such an excellent escape plan in the face of the crazy orcs. But when Edwin saw the personal belongings of the navy officers being thrown out of the hold like trash, just to accommodate the hound favored by the nobles. When he saw that only the beautiful maids who were willing to be toyed with by the nobles could board the ship, and the old maids were heartlessly abandoned, crying their hearts out on the dock, Edwin Van Cleef still clenched his fists tightly, not even noticing that his nails dug deep into his palms and bled. The nobles were almost the masters of fate. Edwin had been pushed into the abyss of despair time and time again under the unreasonable manipulation of fate. That was until he met Duke Marcus, the miracle child who rose to the top of the kingdom's hierarchy with his astonishing talent, courage, and wisdom. He saw another clean stream in the kingdom other than Anduin Lothar. Unlike Lothar, he could be of use under Duque, and unknowingly, he had greater hopes for Duque. Would Duque finally grasp the power of Stormwind and sweep away the filthy aristocratic wind? He shouldn't be fantasizing, but Edwin couldn't help but wonder what would happen if Duque was in a high position. Edwin was still too young. His thoughts were practically written all over his face. Among Duque's subordinates, Makarov was never a talented fighter. However, as the leader of the mercenaries, the oldest Makarov had the most experience in dealing with people and observing their body language. Makarov saw through Edwin's thoughts in an instant. As he marveled at Duque's supernatural prophecy ability, Makarov moved his mouth close to Van Cleef's ear and spoke in a voice that only Van Cleef could hear. Master also said that fate will punish the weak, incompetent, and filthy. Edwin Van Cleef shuddered. Is Master Marcus hinting at something? He turned his head abruptly. Makarov, the old but shrewd count, had a "I didn't say anything" look on his face. Edwin suddenly had a feeling that Xueqi had prepared some sort of backup plan. Was he going to wipe out all the filthy and despicable nobles? What was he going to do? Was he going to act under the king's nose when the orcs were invading? After all, no matter how wise and great Cleon was, he had never touched the interests of these nobles, let alone punished them. Everything Lang did was to improve the lives of the people outside of the traditional circle of interests of the nobles. But Master Xueqi, Edwin's mind was a mess. He knew that he was the backbone of Xueqi's faction, and Makarov was Xueqi's mouthpiece. There was no need for Makarov to lie to him. Did Xueqi see through his thoughts and want his complete loyalty? What kind of joke is this? What value do I have that the great Sea King would place so much importance on me? Van Cleef's head was about to explode. The only thing he knew was that if anything happened to these nobles during this escape, it would definitely have something to do with Xueqi. After sharing a shocking secret, the thrill of entering the core of Xueqi's power was like a strong wine being poured into his veins, giving Edwin a sense of excitement. Perhaps Duke Marcus really was the hero in his heart who could lead the people onto the path of greatness. Time passed quickly, and 2 hours later, the preparations for departure were finally completed. In fact, Van Cleef's ship was the first to set sail. A transport ship modified from a civilian merchant ship could not compare to a real warship in terms of speed or direction. Less than half an hour into the voyage, Van Cleef saw the warships loaded with nobles and expensive valuables easily overtake their transport ships, disappearing into the horizon in the short span of an hour. Van Cleef sneered as he watched the warships that had removed all the naval flags of Stormwind, leaving only the lion flag in place of the noble family's insignia. Night fell. The curtain of night receded, but danger was approaching the nobles in the early morning. After the morning mist dissipated, the blood sails that blotted out the sun could be seen in the distance. The private sailor in charge of the lookout was indescribably shocked. He couldn't react in time, and was stunned for a few seconds before he rang the alarm. Clang, clang, clang. Not good. Not good. It's the Bloodsail Pirates. The Bloodsail Pirates were a group of pirates formed by the rebel army led by Duke Varel. Their headquarters were in Stranglethorn Vale. As a group of pirates that used to be part of the navy, the Bloodsail Pirates were extremely powerful. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if the nobles left the navy behind, they might not be able to fight against the Bloodsail Pirates, not to mention that they had courted death by chasing all the navy off the ship. Fear and uneasiness swept through the entire fleet like a freezing wind in a very short time. Countless nobles were awakened from their dreams by the alarm bell, and everyone's eyes were hazy. But after hearing the name of the Bloodsail Pirates, everyone's sleepiness was blown away. Impossible! This was the first reaction of all the nobles. Once they put on their clothes with the help of their maids and stepped out of the cabin onto the deck, their expressions froze in fear. Chapter 171. Impossible? This was the first reaction of the nobles. Oh no! This was their next thought. The long period of peace at sea had numbed them. They had even forgotten that there was such a thing as pirates. There were no pirates in Stormwind before because they were too poor. There were not many ships that occasionally arrived at Stormwind City. That kind of wealth could not attract large-scale pirates. What else was left in Stormwind City? What could a dozen fishing boats, which were not much bigger than a sampan, bring? As for Sea King Xueqi's Pearl Fleet, it was escorted by Naga. It was like a hedgehog, and anyone who touched it would be stabbed. It was different now. Most of the nobles who fled from the Elven Forest to Stormwind City brought with them the wealth that their families had accumulated for thousands of years. In order to carry as much treasure as possible on the limited cabins, the brainless nobles even subconsciously ignored the existence of danger, and even the original navy on the ship were thrown off the ship. In order to escape from Stormwind City as soon as possible, they did not even wait for the slow civilian transport ships. Otherwise, they could at least use them as bait to delay the Bloodsail Pirates. If this was on land, the nobles could more or less resist with their strong guards. Unfortunately, this was the sea. In all fairness, it was a miracle that most people who could not swim could exert 70% of their strength on a ship that was constantly shaking. Not to mention, the private sailors of the nobles were at most goods that ran merchant ships. This was really courting death. They could have courted death anywhere, but they just had to court death in a domain that they were unfamiliar with. Turn around and run. We'll be safe once we get back to the fleet. There are warships of Kultiras there. Duke Agath Ferens, who had rushed over after hearing the news, grabbed the captain's collar, his eyes bloodshot. Yes, anyone could die. The noble bloodline could not be severed on this damned sea. There were also warships of Kultiras helping the fleet. Although those warships were also full of civilians, the warships were operated by the strong soldiers of the Kingdom of Sea. If they had to die, they could die by the Kultiras. It's too late, the captain cried. We're carrying too much weight. We're already overloaded, we can't run fast. Turn around and run. Throw away the things. Throw away the heaviest gold. Only by staying alive could the clan continue. What's the use of gold if I'm dead? The old duke's silver hair and beard danced wildly in the wind, his crimson eyes showing a rare sense of rationality amidst the fear. As the sails changed direction, more than 10 huge Stormwind warships began to draw huge arcs of white waves on the surface of the sea. Unfortunately, because there was no unified command, some of them had full rudders on the left, while others had full rudders on the right. The direct result was that the two ships almost collided head-on. Both sides were flustered and managed to avoid the worst situation of the bow collision at the last moment. Even so, the collision of the sides and the decorations on the sides of the two ships that brushed past each other scared the wits out of them. For a time, the scene was extremely chaotic. Trash! In the distant flagship of the Bloodsail pirates, a voice rang out. Brigadier General Lester Zank flashed a contemptuous smile, but when he saw the nobles starting to let their men drop a large number of heavy boxes to lighten the ship's load, he had a bad feeling. When he saw the golden light emitting from a box that disintegrated in mid-air, his bad premonition was confirmed. Lester could not help but curse. Gold! It's all F*King gold. You bunch of noble scum think you can run away just by throwing away the weights? Idiot. I don't want the ransom. I'll spend 3 days and 3 nights roasting the guy who came up with this rotten idea into charcoal. Lester almost fell into madness from anger. This was the F*King deep sea. Precious metals thrown into the sea could only sink to unreachable depths or become food for the fishes. How am I supposed to fish them out? Fire! Fire the bow cannon! Lester yelled at the top of his lungs. The first mate was dumbfounded. Brigadier General Zank, we haven't entered the effective firing range yet. If we just use the bow cannon. Idiot, do you still expect that bunch of lousy land nobles to fight us in a gorgeous naval battle like Kultiras? I'm going to destroy their stupid idea of escaping. As the command flag fell, a dozen or so unglamorous parabolas set up a battle bridge in the faint light of dawn and began to erode the little courage of the nobles. The cannonballs, which were not intended to hit, landed near the noble fleet with ridiculously poor crosshairs, stirring up a huge column of water and creating a faint rainbow that surrounded the noble warships. From the nobles' point of view, this was already an overwhelming bombardment that was like a torrential rain. Then, something called probability theory, which was actually called metaphysics, came into play in the dark. In this era, the hit rate of long-range bombardment was extremely low. Unless it was within 100 meters, which was called close-range combat, the hit rate was mostly less than 1%. To be able to fire a cannon within a radius of 100 meters under the interference of a series of problems such as the strong wind, the trembling of the ship itself due to waves and other bombardment, and the maintenance of the barrel itself was already a godly gunner. To be able to hit a target with one shot was simply a legend. But one guy really did it. From afar, a curved cannon from the bow of a ship 800 meters away blasted directly into the armory of a noble's warship, causing a brilliant chain of explosions. When the warship exploded, the flames that soared into the sky, the wood shavings that were blown away and kept spinning in the air, as well as a large number of human limbs. Everything was like a horrifying oil painting from hell, deeply imprinted on the retinas of the nobles. In less than a minute, as many as 7 noble warships stopped their ships and raised their white flags high up. More Bloodsail pirate ships, which had been designed for extreme speed, rushed into the nobles' fleet and immediately launched a close-range bombardment against the nobles' private sailors who attempted to resist. Bang, bang, bang. The well-trained Bloodsail pirate ships fired continuously from bow to stern, teaching the nobles' private soldiers a good lesson on what a naval battle was. Of course, the nobles' private soldiers retaliated with cannons. It was a laughable salvo. Leicester, who was watching the battle from afar, was stunned. He did not expect these private soldiers, who had only sailed merchant ships before, to be this retarded. The huge counterforce even pushed the entire ship 5 meters to the other side, as if it was moving horizontally. The cabin, which could not withstand the impact, even let out a typical cry of wood breaking. But all resistance was futile. The pirates bit their machetes and jumped over the cable that they had prepared. Everything was going smoothly, but when they killed their way into the enemy's cabin, there was a sudden change. A huge devil appeared. The clothes hanging on his chest even retained the noble's family emblem. Chapter 172. A kilometer above the sea west of Stormwind City, Lothar and his griffin knights followed Duque's griffin and flew at high speed. Is the news true? When my Naga sent me the news, I informed you and His Majesty Lang immediately. We have to hurry, or we'll have to collect the corpses of those guys. When he heard Duque say that the nobles' fleet had been attacked, there was a moment when Lothar instinctively suspected that Duque was the one behind it. The reason was simple. As the upstart of Stormwind City, Duque had always been at odds with the traditional nobles. Even the Brando family, which had a direct conflict with Duque in the past, had never shown any signs of reconciliation on any formal occasions. Even if they wanted to stab you in the back 1,000 times and insert steel needles into each of your fingers, the nobles would still maintain their elegance and demeanor in front of others. If it weren't for the blood of Thoradin the Great and the friendship of Lang, Lothar might have long been killed in a dark corner of Stormwind City, and his corpse would have rotted away. Duque. Although Lothar trusted him, he could never see through Duque. At such a tense time, there was no need for Duque to lie to him and Lang. Instead, he fabricated an attack on the nobles to lure him away. Lothar had no choice but to save the nobles. After all, among all human kingdoms, the nobles were known as the cornerstones of the country. In fact, there was even a saying in the upper class of many kingdoms. The useless peasants can die, but as long as there are wise and brave nobles, the country can be revived even if it's destroyed. Lothar did not want to save them, but he had no choice. Anduin and Duque were the only cards that Lang could play. Duque, aren't your Nagas supposed to escort the fleet? Please, I only have more than 100 Nagas and a few thousand useless murlocs. Please, this route is nearly 1,000 nautical miles long. How much territory do you expect to guard? But I've asked them to hurry. But looking at the schedule, we should arrive first. The attack on the nobles' fleet was indeed a blind spot for him, and all of the upper echelons of Stormwind. Rather than saying that it was a blind spot, it was more accurate to say that the orcs' attacks were too powerful and attracted all of their attention. Just by imagining it, one would know that such a weak guard was loaded with the wealth of the noble families for thousands of years. It would be abnormal if it did not attract the attention of pirates, right? Noxus didn't say anything and followed Duke silently with over 30 griffin knights. Duque didn't take any detours. He went straight to the scene. That was an hour after the battle between the Blood Sail pirates and the nobles' fleet. The situation was so chaotic that Lothar didn't know what was going on. More than 20 Blood Sail pirate ships surrounded the battle in the middle, not daring to approach. In the battle, almost every 2 Blood Sail pirate ships sandwiched a Stormwind warship, initiating a white soldier battle. The ships on the periphery were like chicken ribs, tasteless and a pity to abandon. They didn't dare to open fire, nor did they dare to send pirates to help their own ships. Because every warship was in a melee. The protagonists of the melee were not the nobles' private soldiers, nor the Blood Sail pirates, nor were they Nagas or Murlocs. Instead, they were demons emitting blazing heat. Riding the griffin and circling half a circle in the sky, Lothar's face turned green. If the Blood Sail pirates had released the demons to attack the nobles of Stormwind, Lothar would have jumped down without a second thought. Obviously, it was the Blood Sail pirates who were being slaughtered. The blue-skinned, burly demon guards were incomparably dazzling under the sunlight. They brandished their huge axes, and with their outstanding combat talent, they laughed wildly on the shaking ship, wantonly killing the Blood Sail pirates whose morale had already collapsed. The scene was like a butcher with a blood-stained knife chasing a fat pig that had nowhere to run. The pig's death was only a matter of time. So, the demons were released by the nobles? However, seeing many of the nobles' private soldiers and corpses lying on the deck, Lothar knew that things were not that simple. At this moment, Xueqi could not help but sneer in his heart. That's right. He was the one who orchestrated this whole situation. He spent a full 3 months asking Makarov to secretly collect the opinions of the nobles in Stormwind and verify them one by one. After obtaining a large amount of evidence of the nobles' crimes, he made a death list. Of course, Fame Brando and his family were at the top of his must-kill list. Below them were the allies of the Brando family. As a transmigrator, Xueqi was very clear about the nature of the nobles, and what these greedy fellows would do when their lives were threatened. Xueqi had waited for this day for a long time. After the dark portal opened, he had long ago contacted the blood sail pirates in the south of Stranglethorn Vale through secret means. As an ambitious butler of the nobles who wanted a piece of the pie, he told them how the nobles would transport away their 1,000-year-old wealth. Xueqi had also thought about what would happen if he implicated the Stormwind Navy. In that instant, Xueqi also hesitated. He did not want to kill a good person by mistake. But the heavens gave Xueqi another great opportunity. It was a group of nobles that Windsor had rescued from Karazhan. Baron Rayford Drugel, Count Crispin Ferrens, Countess Dorothy Millsdeep, Countess Catriona Warnindi. Xueqi was familiar with every one of these guys. Why? Because these guys were originally part of the Karazhan dungeon of Warcraft. They were the secondary bosses under the second boss Butler Moros. From what Xueqi knew, these guys were already undead when he saw them. If Ralph Drugel could use the Paladin's Sanction skill, he should be the father of Jules Drugel, the deputy mayor of Twilight Forest's Night Town. Xueqi knew about this as soon as he came out of Karazhan. He did not believe that these guys, who were supposed to be one of the bosses, could escape from Karazhan full of demons and scathed. Xueqi took the opportunity to get close to a few of them. Just like when Xueqi used the system elf to discover that there was something wrong with Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras. In his retina, he saw the boss template of these guys, with the word demon attached. Duke was laughing so hard that his belly almost burst. That's right, these demons were part of the insurance that Xueqi had set up. It could ensure that even if one day a great detective was so resourceful and found evidence of his collusion with the Bloodsail pirates, Lang would not blame him for this matter. The demons were led in by the nobles themselves. Who could be blamed for leading the wolf into the house? Perhaps it was because of this that Stormwind wanted to cover up this disaster of, most of the kingdom's nobles are demons. In the end, perhaps this was a murder that had once been treading on thin ice. If one part went wrong, the reputation that Xueqi had worked so hard to build would no longer exist. But after Xueqi carried out the perfect murder, to the end, he could establish a perfect ending that was beneficial to the whole kingdom and even all of humanity. When the goal was achieved, the truth of this murder would never need to be exposed. Chapter 173. The demon was very powerful. It was so powerful that even the warriors recognized by the nobles couldn't shake it. Even a slap that couldn't even be considered a formal attack could smash a person's head into a rotten watermelon. A dog-like demon with 4 feet on the ground opened its huge mouth and swallowed the entire person, along with the armor and the weapon in his hand. The horrifying teeth that sounded like millstones grinding the body in metal, as well as the guards' dying wails, lingered in his ears. After seeing such a scene and hearing such a sound, just the thought of facing such a thing made their hands and feet tremble uncontrollably. It just so happened that such a thing was actually transformed by his dearest family member. The huge demon didn't just spread its massacre towards those damned Bloodsail pirates, it also extended its claws of death towards those who were originally on the same side. It didn't differentiate between friend and foe, and killed as it pleased. This was simply a nightmare. This kind of nightmare seemed to be endless. Resistance was meaningless, and all who resisted had been crushed to dregs. There was also no point in running, because the 2 ships were only so big, and there was nowhere to run. Every survivor was a pitiful wretch waiting in despair for the final judgment to come. At this moment, a shining holy existence descended from the sky. Looking up blankly, he recognized that it was the radiance of arcane power unique to mages. A powerful mage? Who could it be? After almost forcibly conscripting all the private mages of the nobles, Stormwind still suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Magic. The Storm Kingdom's Wong Clan's mage squad only existed in name. There were only a few high-ranked mages still active on the front lines. Obviously, it was the one that the nobles didn't want to see the most. Sea King Duke Marcus. The mortal enemy that the nobles would never reconcile with had become their greatest savior. This had to be said to be ironic. Of course, this was only for the nobles that were still alive. Not even 1% of the nobles that were still alive now. It was very simple. The demons from Karazhan could easily develop believers among these people whose hearts had been corrupted, and even directly turn them into demons. A pure soul was the most powerful line of defense. Even the leader of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, had to spend decades to completely corrode Mediva's soul. It was still an incomplete version, because at the very end, old Mike still jumped out and gave CEO Sam a big explosion. But when it came to nobles with pure hearts, Xueqi chuckled. Not every noble was qualified to be a paladin, and not every noble was named Bolvar for dragon. When the pirates arrived in front of the nobles, most of the nobles were desperately protected by their guards and gathered together. When the pirates' butcher knives saw the necks of these nobles that had actually become devils, the devils naturally jumped out and revealed their true bodies. In such a crowded situation, how many people could survive if the demon directly bloomed in the middle of the crowd? Anyway, when Xueqi landed on the ship, he did not see any nobles surviving. Oh, surviving in human form. Xueqi, Marcus. It was a roaring blast of air that was like a raging storm and a huge wave. Well, Xueqi couldn't hear it clearly, so he used his little finger to pick his ear. Did someone just call me? Bastard. You are. It's all your fault. Facing this more than 3-meter-tall mutated demon with a typical blue demon guard body and a nondescript human head, Xueqi was dismissive. Xueqi snorted coldly, and suddenly a huge piece of ice rose under his feet, raising Xueqi's body like a high platform. In the blink of an eye, Xueqi was already standing on a 2-meter-high platform. This way, he could look down on the demon. Ah, sorry, you're too short, I didn't see. You're presumptuous. The demon suddenly pounced. You're the presumptuous one. Suddenly, a mysterious blue magic circle appeared in front of Duke, and a powerful arcane impact turned into a huge fist, and the demon that was charging at him was pushed back even faster than when it came. Bang bang bang. The demon that crashed into the cabin knocked over a lot of things, but the demon quickly climbed out again. Oh, it's you, Sir Fame Brando. We haven't seen each other for more than half a year. How come you've grown uglier? Under the watchful eyes of dozens of survivors on the deck of the two ships, Xueqi mercilessly mocked the demonized Fame Brando. I'm going to peel off your skin and make it into a carpet. Fame roared and charged again. But this time, he didn't charge recklessly. His 2 claws were glowing with a black light. Unfortunately, the gap was too big. Fame Brando, who had been driven out of the Storm Royal Magic Academy by Xueqi, had also missed the Dalajan recruitment last year. As a result, before becoming a demon, Sir Brando was still at the level of a magic apprentice. Demons were also divided into different levels. The more powerful an existence was, the more powerful it would be after it became a demon. How strong could a guy like Fam, who had wasted half a year, be? Putting aside the fact that Xueqi was already a sky mage, even if Xueqi was still an earth mage, he could still easily beat him up. 12 hands of magic appeared and shot out arcane missiles. For Fam, it was like a storm. Puff, puff, puff. Everyone was dumbfounded. In their eyes, that unparalleled terrifying demon was nothing but a punching bag in Xueqi's hands. Every arcane missile could easily blast a muscle on Brando's arm or thigh into pieces. The number of bullets that flew past Brando's body was the same number of holes or gaps that appeared on his body. Ah! Less than 10 seconds, Brando had become a human stick. Oh no, a demon stick. His limbs were all broken, and there were terrifying holes the size of a human's fist on his body. Every hole was spewing out bluish-purple demon blood. Even so, Brando was still alive. Rolling on the ground in pain, wriggling his wounded body like a worm, Fame Brando could not stop laughing. Ha ha ha, Xueqi. In the end, you're just as dirty as me. What saint who saved the world? What hero who fought against the orcs? Aren't you just like me, filled with vengeance and hatred? Ha 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 ha. I despise hypocrites like you the most. I know you won't let me go, so I'll wait for you in hell. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, a huge ice coffin wrapped around Brando, ending this demon's life. Looking at the burning warships in the distance, Xueqi muttered to himself, I just killed a demon, but this demon happened to be called Fame Brando. Chapter 174. Surprisingly, Xueqi didn't feel anything when he killed Fame Brando. If it was when he had just transmigrated, perhaps Xueqi would have been shocked, or he would have found it very satisfying. But now, he only felt as if a symbol of the past had been erased, and he had just ended a part of the past. After the flying hand of magic killed the 4 demons that had been transformed from nobles in the lower cabin, everything quieted down. But the cold aura that lingered around Xueqi was obviously just the ice barrier that mages often used, but the coldness that seemed to be able to completely freeze people's souls clearly told every survivor who was in charge here. At this moment, Xueqi was God. A god who dominated the nearly 100 survivors on the 2 ships. Although the blood sail pirates who attacked the nobles' fleet were frightened, the nobles weren't much better. They had long known that Xueqi had a grudge against the Brando family, and this matter had become a topic of conversation among the nobles and servants during their leisure time. Now, if Xueqi was really unforgiving and said that the rest of the people had a demonic aura on them, and then he would kill them all, they wouldn't even have a place to cry. The people, trembling, quietly waited for the Master of Fate to speak. "Hey, Bloodsail, all of you surrender, or die." What a joke. Facing the demon just now, the Bloodsail pirates had already felt that sense of despair and helplessness. Now they were facing Pharaoh, who could easily deal with that demon. When Xueqi's cold voice came out, the Bloodsail pirates instead felt as if they had been granted amnesty, and they all threw down the weapons in their hands. Xueqi glanced at them coldly. "Who's the leader here?" Following the gaze of a pirate, Xueqi easily found a strong pirate covered in blood. The pirate in white with a red headscarf braced himself and stood up. "Sir, what are your orders?" "Raise the white flag. After I finish dealing with the other pirates, you drive your ship away. If you want to escape, it doesn't matter, my merman will be here soon, and..." Xueqi gently raised his right hand. As usual, he used Calm Mind and Flame Blast to easily blast a small lifeboat that was trying to escape into the sky. Boom! It was a water column that was more than 10 meters tall. The berserk fireball not only blasted the entire sampan and the pirates on it into mincemeat, the scorching high temperature even caused large clouds of steam to ripple out, scorching the few pirates standing at the side of the ship more than 10 meters away. Silence! Silence! Deathly silence! Such an exaggerated, instantaneous spell made these mortals forget to breathe. No, it wasn't forgetting. It was the kind of feeling that before Xueqi nodded, she had lost the courage to even breathe. Xueqi smiled faintly. "Trust me, the outcome of running away is definitely worse than this. That was just a demon, no?" The current Xueqi was more like a demon in the eyes of the pirates. The group of pirates nodded like sifting rice. Xueqi didn't care about them anymore. With a whistle, the griffin that had been hovering in the air for a long time immediately landed on the deck. Looking at Xueqi facing the air current of the griffin's descent and getting ready to mount it, one of the noble's guards asked with a trembling voice, "Sir, are you really not planning to do anything to the Brando family?" Xueqi paused. No one should be born noble. Since they are born into a wealthy family, then they should act in accordance with their noble status. I am saddened by the fact that so many people in your family have been corrupted and turned into demons. But punishing you is His Majesty Rin's business. My duty is to save every citizen of Stormwind. Ignoring the remaining members of the Brando family, Xueqi rode the griffin into the air. On the other side, on another ship not far from the Brando family's ship, Lothar was pulling the king's sword out of the demon's neck. The splattered demon's blood stained the cabin door. He tilted his head and saw Xueqi riding the griffin from the Brando family's warship. He was deep in thought. That's right. Lothar didn't stop Xueqi from rushing over to the warship flying the Brando family's flag. To some extent, Lothar had already acquiesced to Xueqi's revenge. Understanding didn't mean understanding. Lothar was an upright person. If Xueqi started a massacre for personal revenge, Lothar might not say anything, but it would undoubtedly lower his evaluation of Xueqi in his heart. Seeing that there were still a large number of human figures on the 2 ships, Lothar secretly breathed a sigh of relief. At least Xueqi didn't start a massacre, so everything was within a reasonable range. As for what Xueqi did on the ship, everything would be clear when he returned. Xueqi immediately pounced on the second group of warships. After coming out of Karazhan, Xueqi always had a question. How strong was he? It was a very mysterious question. In terms of the quality of his mana, he was still within the range of sky mages. he could mobilize the elemental power within a considerable range. According to the results of his scan of Old Norton, he knew very well that his strength had long surpassed that of ordinary sky mages. In terms of the total amount of mana, Xueqi, who had inherited the arcane fire circuit from the High Elf Sun King and part of the inheritance from Medivh, had about 10 times more mana than a sky mage of the same level. That didn't mean that his strength was 10 times greater. With the help of the system elf, Xueqi, who could achieve multiple spells without any hindrance, could match the entire Storm King family's team of mages alone. In the process of mobilizing the elements in the surrounding atmosphere, he could cast more spells that were far beyond his strength. Hence, when he faced Count Christian Ferens, who should also be a boss, he really didn't feel any pressure. Solo. That was Xueqi's dream before he transmigrated. Now, it had been realized by Xueqi without any difficulty. In the face of a full-scale magic attack from the sky and the ground, Count Ferens, who had transformed into a huge doom guard with blood-red wings, was completely one-sided. An arcane impact that turned into a huge fist punched the Count into the air, and then there was a continuous and accurate magic bombardment. Even though the demonized Count was only 1 meter above the deck, the terrible magic attack didn't hit the deck at all. In just 3 seconds, the demonized Count Christian Ferens was killed. Xueqi cleared the demons on the noble's warship at a very terrifying speed and subdued the blood sail pirates on it. When the Naga priestess Vara arrived half an hour later, everything was a foregone conclusion. Not only the blood sail pirates who were entangled in hand-to-hand combat, but even the warship that was trying to escape could not escape Xueqi's pursuit. An hour and a half later, the blood sail pirates that attacked the noble were completely annihilated, and the commander of the blood sail pirates, Brigadier General Lester Zank, was killed by Xueqi. All the ships were taken back by Stormwind. Chapter 175. On this day in August, fear and uneasiness lingered on the entire retreating fleet. The news that the noble's warships had been attacked by the blood sail pirates had been spread to the entire fleet through the Griffin Knights. Kurtiras, Commodore Cook, who was experienced in naval battles, had originally decided to let the entire fleet return. However, the messenger sent by Lothar insisted that Anduin and Xueqi could deal with the enemy's fleet, and that the Murlocs led by Naga had already rushed over. After some hesitation, Cook decided to maintain 3/4 of the sail, and deliberately split the fleet into 2. The fleet of Kurtiras, which had a certain amount of combat power, would lead the way, while the transport ships at the back would still have a chance to escape if they saw that something was wrong. 3 hours later, a large number of blood sail pirates appeared on the horizon. The strange scarlet almost made the lookouts subconsciously ring the alarm bells. In fact, a young lookout really did so. However, Kurtiras, who had foreseen the danger, arranged for double the number of lookouts, and another more experienced lookout stopped the young man. "Wait! Look at the flag on it." After seeing it clearly, all the lookouts were dumbfounded. "Captain, I suggest that you come and see this." Yes, it was indeed the warships of the blood sail pirates. The navy of Kurtiras, who were of the same lineage, would recognize those ships even if they were reduced to ashes. In order to maintain the flexibility of the ship in all winds, it had a single horizontal sail and 3 triangular sails. The ship's sides were specially raised for boarding battles, and a removable wooden outer deck was installed for cannonade battles. Everything was clearly telling the navy of Kurtiras that this was indeed an old adversary. However, the golden lion flag of Stormwind hanging on the main mast was telling the world that this was already the property of Stormwind. The eyes of the navy of Kurtiras were burning with passion. Before becoming the blood sail pirates, the leader of the blood sail pirates, Duke Fairville, had spent a lot of money to build the best warships in the whole of Kurtiras. In terms of quality alone, it was even above the main fleet of Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. The only difference was that the total number of ships that Duke Fairville had taken away was relatively small. There were only 12 large merchant ships and 24 warships. After modification and upgrading, these 36 ships were definitely the main force of the blood sail pirates. Now that a total of 12 battleships had been taken away by the Stormwind, it would be strange if the people of Kurtiras were not envious. If they didn't know that Stormwind Kingdom was about to fall, they would have suspected that Stormwind Kingdom was going to threaten their position as the overlord of the sea. Not only that, but the standard of the newly built small warships was also quite good. In addition to the ships that the nobles had taken away, what appeared in front of the people of Kurtiras was a huge fleet composed of 70 warships of various sizes. If it weren't for the fact that they could see through the binoculars that the Naga and the Murlocs were escorting the blood-sail pirates to do their work, the people of Kultiras might have gone mad with jealousy. Brigadier General Cook put down his binoculars and muttered to himself, "Damn it, if we didn't have a stronger green skin to deal with, I would definitely suggest the General suppress Stormwind when I get back." On Poseidon, Van Cleef leaned against the porthole and stared at the strange fleet that was sailing in the opposite direction from the south of the fleet. The distance between the two sides was so close that he could even see the despair and dejection on the faces of the nobles' private soldiers. That was definitely not the expression of joy after surviving a disaster. If he had to use a word to describe them, it would be stray dogs. Excited blood pumped out of Van Cleef's heart and ignited his entire body. He felt his body and soul burning. The nobles are finished. Those arrogant nobles are finished. This voice was so clear and real that Van Cleef almost couldn't control himself. No matter how Duque did it, when the rotten flesh was cut off, even if Stormwind City fell, Stormwind would usher in a new life. Unknowingly, Edwin Van Cleef's heart was filled with the light of Duque. It was a fanaticism that made him offer everything of himself, including his loyalty, his life, his soul, and even his most beloved daughter Vanessa. Late at night, Van Cleef couldn't calm down for a long time. Of course, he wasn't the only one who couldn't calm down. King Lang read the report 3 times, but after reading it, he was still stunned for a full minute and couldn't speak. This report was too shocking. It wasn't just him, all the high-ranking nobles in Stormwind City were silent. Among the evacuated nobles, 1/10 of them were demons. When the blood-sail pirates launched their attack, the demons who revealed their true forms caused the largest death of nobles since the founding of Stormwind. Of the 387 titled nobles, only 32 survived, and all of them were injured. 7 families were forever exterminated, and the remaining 13 families were also sparsely populated. Half of the surviving nobles were minors. Most of them were seriously frightened. This wasn't a fabricated report by someone or some force. The testimony of more than 800 survivors was almost unanimous. These survivors included several extremely devout priests. It wasn't just them. The testimony of the blood-sail pirates' prisoners was similar. Lang closed his eyes in pain. Do I have to tell the people that the lords they trust as leaders, the nobles of Stormwind who inherited Thoradin the Great, 1/10 of them are demons? Lang's voice wasn't loud, but it clearly spread to every corner of the meeting hall. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. If they did that, it would be a huge blow to their morale. At this time, Count Carton, who used to be an ally of the Brando family, raised his hand and asked to speak. "Why can't we think on the bright side? At least we got twice the number of ships. We have enough fishermen to act as sailors. We can evacuate the people twice as fast." Lang shuddered, and suddenly felt a little warmth in his chest. Yes, the people's losses would be reduced. But, Earl Cairton spoke again, the people who died were all local lords. I think we should respect their opinions before announcing the results to the public. After all, they are the cornerstone of the kingdom. The Count's words were like music to their ears. Most of the nobles had evacuated this time, but not every one of them could do so. For example, the nobles with important military positions in the kingdom. How could their own children become demons and kill their own people? How could they announce such a shameful thing? In fact, they had already thought of a reason, but they just didn't dare to say it. Now that Count Carton gave them a way out, they were so happy that they wanted to run up and kiss the Count on the spot. Oh, they really had to rely on their own people at the critical moment. Chapter 176. They did not know who was the instigator of this incident. Revenge and whatnot could wait. The most important thing right now was to disassociate themselves from this disgrace. As long as their reputation was restored. So what if they died? At most, it would just be a redistribution of benefits. If their reputation was preserved, even if this ship named Lang Rin sank, they would have an excuse to seek refuge with the other human kingdoms in the north. After a short discussion, Marquis Daminan braced himself and stepped forward. He bowed to Lang and said, "With your Majesty's permission, we hope to announce it as follows. In order to cover the retreat of the people, the noble army led by Duke Ferens fought against the blood-sail pirates. When they gained the upper hand, the nobles who had been secretly turned into demons by the blood-sail pirates suddenly counterattacked, causing the fleet to be routed. At this time, The brave and fearless Sir Lothar and Earl Marcus arrived on their griffins and cooperated with the remnants of the noble army to annihilate the Bloodsail pirates' sank fleet. Despicable! Shameless! At this moment, Lothar's lungs almost exploded with anger. It was clearly you bunch of nobles who despicably robbed the warships of the Stormwind Navy. In order to transport away the dirty wealth filled with the blood and sweat of the people, you unexpectedly suffered a double attack from the pirates and demons. Yet you still don't forget to flatter yourself at this time? If not for Lang holding him down, he would have already exploded after receiving the news of the warships being seized. Lothar's hair stood on end. In the next second, he was about to draw his sword and behead this shameless man. But at this moment, Count Daminan was suddenly slapped away. Count Carton's slightly plump body spun twice in the air before falling heavily to the ground. Shameless! A thunderous roar shook the meeting hall. Not many nobles looked at the person who slapped Count Carton. He was the new generation of nobles, the most popular figure recently, Duke Marcus. This young duke had a more unyielding aura than Lothar. Duque abruptly waved his hand and pointed at Count Daminan, whose face was now swollen. While commoners risk their lives to dig moats for a ship ticket, you nobles throw a naval officer in a Stormwind into the dock for a chest of gold. Lothar's eyebrows twitched. When 100,000 soldiers and civilians were prepared to risk their lives to bring up the rear, you guys didn't even care about how the warship would return just to take away a beautiful maid. You guys even blew away the last soldier on the warship. Lord Bolvar Fordragon's cheeks burned. It's obviously the filthy wealth of you nobles that attracted the pirates. It's obvious that it's your own corrupted souls that brought about the depravity of the pirates. You have the cheek to claim that you're the heroes who fought against the pirates. Claiming to be the descendant of Thoradin the Great? Bah! I don't want to be associated with you. With that, Duque spat on Marquis Daminan's face. It was obvious that Duque had insulted Marquis Daminan. Every noble present felt that the spit was on their faces. King Lang trembled from head to toe. At this moment, Len was frantically asking himself, "Am I wrong? Was I really wrong?" Ever since he was young, the former king had always taught him that the nobles were the cornerstone of the kingdom, and that no one should touch the nobles. Lang had always regarded it as a sacred law. But as he grew older, he could not accept the actions of the nobles. Still, he always remembered the former king's blessing and did not act ruthlessly against the nobles. At this moment, this scene was constantly stimulating Lang's conscience and sense of justice. It made him tremble uncontrollably. However, as the hope of the kingdom, Duque had a direct conflict with the old nobles, which was not what he wanted to see. For a moment, Lang was a little confused. On the other side, the nobles were in an uproar. Duque was a hothead. Why did he have to be so stupid? Why did he have to act up at this time? Shouldn't the nobles have discussed all the conditions behind the scenes? And only when the negotiations failed would they have no choice but to stand on their respective sides and fight? Flipping out at the slightest disagreement? That's why they hated those ignorant peasants becoming nobles. The nobles were smart. Of course, they would not entangle with Duque over this matter that had already been sentenced to death. Apologize. Your actions are a despicable act that tarnishes the reputation of all nobles. Yes. Apologize. Immediately apologize to Marquis Daminan. Otherwise, we will not recognize your noble status. The group of nobles clamored, clinging to the fact that Duque had violated the nobility's etiquette. Humph. Duque's cold snort caused the temperature of the entire hall to drop by more than 5 degrees. Nobility's etiquette. Nobility's standards. Fine, I'll do things according to the nobility's etiquette. When Duque finished speaking, the nobles breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the hothead Duque had finally given in. Who knew that in the next second, Duque would throw a white glove at the Marquis' face? Well, for the sake of etiquette, nobles would always wear white gloves. And throwing a white glove at the other party's face meant only one thing: a duel. When the conflict between two nobles was so big that it could no longer be resolved, they could settle it with a duel with a suitable notary. Those who refused to duel would be seen as the greatest shame of the nobles, and would never be accepted by other nobles for the rest of their lives. Duel. Didn't you think that I insulted you just now? Then duel with me to wash away the shame. Duque's cold and arrogant eyes stared at Marquis Daminan. That pair of indifferent eyes made the Marquis' hair stand on end. The next moment, Xueqi pulled out his sword. Xueqi didn't have a sword of his own. It was a flame sword that he made out of fire elemental essence and copied the standard longsword of Stormwind City out of thin air. The fire elemental essence that was supposed to be extremely hot and violent was actually as tame as a puppy in Xueqi's hand. If it wasn't for the blazing aura that could be clearly felt from a dozen meters away, no one would think that it was a real flame. No. I didn't think you insulted me. Marquis Damanon actually shrank back. Well, after killing so many people, one would naturally have a murderous aura. Xueqi made his debut, killing gnolls, murlocs, nagas, and orcs. Recently, he had even roasted thousands of orcs into charcoal. His murderous aura was definitely at the level of overflowing dominance. On top of that, he had killed Sargeras. According to the legends, he had killed 7 people in the tribal camp. Even if Duke was known to be a swordsman, which nobleman would be stupid enough to fight him? You don't dare? You have no balls. Xueqi spat out his poisonous tongue mercilessly. Just when everyone thought that was the end, more than 36 white gloves suddenly flew through the air and landed on the oily and disgusting faces of the nobles who had been heckling just now. Chapter 177. It was a white glove that was as thin as a cicada's wing made of ice. Although it was made of ice elements, it was indeed in the shape of a white glove. Then, what did Xueqi mean? Whoever is not convinced can come and fight me. Who else? The nobles were silent, not daring to make a sound. Xueqi roared. That's right. I am insulting you. I look down on you. If the nobles are indifferent, selfish, greedy for life, afraid of death, disregard the law, corrupt and arrogant, then the nobles. I don't want to be an earl anymore. As soon as these words came out, the whole room was silent. Don't want to be an earl anymore? If it was during peacetime, the nobles would have immediately roared. What do you think the face of Stormwind is? But now, Xueqi was indispensable. Almost all the sailors and fishermen were Xueqi's people. Xueqi, who had snatched back the warship, had his reputation in the navy soar. There was also the Naga and the Murlocs, whose strength was unknown. Countless people now only remembered Sea King Xueqi, who had saved everyone's lives, Xueqi, who had risked his life to kill the orc camp and burn hundreds of thousands of orcs, and Xueqi, who had risked his life to kill the Devil King for the survival of mankind. But unconsciously, they had forgotten the failed King Lang, who had lost his territory. It was no exaggeration to say that Xueqi had become a symbol of hope in the hearts of the people, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Now, Xueqi was saying that he should not be an earl? With Xueqi's strength, with Xueqi's fame, with Xueqi's wealth, which human country would he not be a guest of honor? Without Xueqi, the entire line of defense of Stormwind City might collapse in 3 days, and then hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians would be wiped out by the orcs. To some extent, it should be Stormwind that had fallen into poverty that could not contain a great god like Xueqi. Yes. Now, it was Xueqi who was forcing her to abdicate. Lang stood up abruptly and looked at Xueqi in disbelief. He had never thought that things would develop to this point. Xueqi had completely stood on the opposite side of the aristocratic class that he was defending. Unfortunately, he couldn't even say the word no. Xueqi abruptly turned around, his eyes shining as he stared at King Lang. Yes, I'm forcing her to abdicate. But I'm not asking for more power. I'm just forcing your majesty to wake up. Proudly stepping forward, Xueqi puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach. I've never been born noble. People are only noble because of their noble behavior. Thoradin the Great, the founder of the Arathor Empire, was the same. 1,000 years ago, the king who led the abandoned people to this valley and founded Stormwind was the same. Why was it noble? Why did the late king set the iron rule that no one can be conferred a title without military merit? The entire meeting hall fell into silence. Only the sound of the wind passing through the windows and sweeping through the hall could be heard. Not only the kings, dukes, and other high-ranking people, but even the royal guards at the side seemed to be lost in thought. They stroked the lion carvings on the edge of their swords, their eyes filled with a thoughtful look. Xueqi's voice continued. Why? Isn't it for today? For today, when mankind is in danger of extinction, to be able to have a true hero and leader worthy of his position, to lead the people out of their predicament and out of despair? In the hall, the eyes of the nobles shrank and dimmed. But the eyes of Lang, Anduin, Bolvar, and the group of guards lit up. Stormwind City is destined to fall, but one day in the future, when Stormwind City is to be recovered, when this great kingdom is to be revived. Please answer me, the great and wise King Rin. At this point, Xueqi suddenly raised his head and looked straight at Lang with his sharp eyes. Are you counting on these so-called nobles who abandoned their people and fled with their wealth to serve you? Or are you counting on those who are truly willing to fight to the end for the future of mankind? Tell me, King Lang Rin, and everyone present who has opened their eyes. Tell me, who do you choose? Xueqi's voice that shook the heart was filled with a firm and sonorous feeling. Every brick, every piece of wall decoration, every inch of ceiling in the hall echoed with Xueqi's question. In just a moment, every truly courageous person in the hall unsheathed their sword and raised it high in the air. I choose Duke Marcus. Windsor, who had once saved the king's life, was the first to step out. This was the choice of the loyal minister of the kingdom. Duke Marcus. The upright and plain-spoken Duke for Dragon stepped out and raised his sword high. This was the choice of the important minister of the kingdom. Beside him, there were nearly 10 superior nobles who were famous for their integrity who raised their swords. Xueqi. The Lion of Azeroth, the king's childhood friend, and the most loyal and courageous Sir Lothar also raised his sword high and made his most important choice. Father. I choose Xueqi. The only heir of the kingdom, the future king, and the future legend of the generation Varian Rin, made a choice that placed the future of the entire kingdom on the line. Reginald Windsor, Bolvar for Dragon, Anduin Lothar. Each and every one of these heroes, who were familiar to the later generations, used their actions to show their attitude. Even Prince Varian Rin, who was supposed to evacuate in the third batch of ships and was still in the council hall, raised his short sword and shouted with them. Xueqi, 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 Xueqi. The voice was like the howling of the wind, like thunder from the ninth heaven that could penetrate one's soul, and it crashed into Lang's heart. Lang felt that he was in an incomparably silent world. There was nothing in the world. Only his own heart was shouting strongly. The voice that was becoming clearer and more precise came from himself, from his ancestors, and from the heroes who had sacrificed their lives for the survival and reproduction of mankind. Countless voices converged into a unique force, pushing him to make a choice at the crossroads of fate. Scorching hot blood rumbled as it flowed out from his heart, spreading to his 4 limbs, to his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, to every corner of his body, agitated and surging. Standing at the crossroads, his eyes seemed to see the future for a moment. To the left, he seemed to see the Stormwind, who trusted the corrupt nobles, completely destroyed in the flames. To the right, he seemed to see the destroyed Stormwind City being reborn from the flames with the help of Xueqi, Anduin, and other loyal and capable ministers. Yes, he might not be able to see the end of this heroic epic. The new era must belong to the next generation. Yet he was able to compose the most splendid beginning to this great human epic. For a moment, Clayan was so shocked that he could not control himself. He pulled out the king's sword and raised it above his head. His gaze seemed to penetrate the fog of fate. Lang made up his mind. Chapter 178. The loyal and brave generals of Stormwind raised the swords in their hands. They could feel the passion in the eyes of their most beloved king. Unknowingly, their breathing and their hearts had synchronized with the king's. It was an inexplicable throbbing of their hearts. One by one, they entered a mysterious state of trance. It was as if they had traveled through time and space to see thousands of years ago, when their ancestors set up the first stone tablet in this strange and lush valley, declaring this place to be called Stormwind City. They seemed to see their ancestors cutting through thorns and thorns, seeing colorful insects fleeing from the grass under their feet, and seeing this land become a paradise for humans. They also seemed to see King Lang, who had inherited the will of their ancestors, about to make a great decision that would change the fate of the entire kingdom. The usually noisy assembly hall was filled with a sacred air that was both familiar and strange at the same time. It was as if they were having a mass in the Storm Cathedral, listening to the Archbishop's sermon and feeling the gaze of the statues on the two sides. The eyes of these great pioneers crossed thousands of years and quietly watched Lang. Quiet and holy. The loyal and brave generals chose to listen, and the despicable nobles gave up on defending. The meeting hall fell into absolute silence. It was as if the whole world had quieted down, just for that holy answer. Lang's eyes were wide open, and his blue pupils were filled with a sense of sublime clarity. The golden lion flag with a blue base and golden edges, which had been passed down in Stormwind for thousands of years, emitted a brilliant light behind him. His voice was clear and magnetic, full of penetrating power, and had an irresistible majesty. I, King Lang Rin of Stormwind, hereby declare that 20 noble families, led by Duke Farron's family, have abused their power, degenerated, and colluded with demons. They have disgraced the name of the nobility, and are a disgrace to the nobility. The names of all 20 noble families are hereby abolished, and all remaining noble children are demoted to commoners. The property they have obtained through improper means will be distributed to the meritorious soldiers in this battle as an example. I declare that anyone, regardless of origin, age, race, or gender, as long as they have made great contributions to Stormwind, will be conferred the title of nobility. Similarly, anyone who dares to betray the interests of humans will be punished by Stormwind, no matter how far away they are. Meritorious service will be rewarded, and crimes will be punished. Anyone who goes against this oath, no matter their background, no matter their status, they will all be killed. It was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. Everyone's face was filled with intense shock. Lang's spirit and boldness could reach such a level. No king would dare to wipe out half of the nobles in the country in one go, but Lang dared. No monarch dared to link the supreme position with merits, but Lang dared. No ruler would have the guts to use talent so freely, but only Lang dared. Even though Duque's actions behind the scenes had caused shocking losses to the nobles and placed it in front of Lang as a fait accompli, even though Duque had used the great crisis of the country's destruction to blackmail Lang, in the end, it was still Lang who made the decision. Lang had made the wisest decision. No, it was even wiser than Duque had expected. It was already the realm of a great man. Based on these 3 points, as long as Lang's Stormwind did not really destroy the country, and as long as Lang's bloodline and policies could continue, Lang was bound to leave a thick stroke in the history of humans in Azeroth. Everyone present felt that their souls had received some kind of mysterious sublimation at this moment. If the resistance against the invasion of the tribes was a glorious hymn, an epic that originally did not belong to a single person, then at this moment, there was only one protagonist, Lang Rin. For humans, for Azeroth, Lang shouted. For humans, for Azeroth, Duque, Anduin, and the others echoed in unison. The feeling of excitement lingered for a long time. Everyone's chest rose and fell violently. They looked at each other and saw the same smile in each other's eyes. Lang glanced coldly at the nobles who had tried to force him to abdicate. Gentlemen, you may leave now. It's time to discuss confidential military affairs. It has nothing to do with you. Lothar and Duke Fordragon stepped forward at the same time. Beside them, more than 10 royal guards formed a fan shape. The nobles' mouths twitched, and there was an unconcealable cowardice in their eyes. In the end, they did not protest anymore, and quietly left. This scene was painted into a famous painting by a later artist based on the eyewitness account. It was auctioned off for a sky-high price of 3 million gold coins. The title of the painting was The End of the Decaying Era. After the nobles left, the huge meeting hall seemed empty. Lang and the others immediately moved to a smaller, more private meeting room. Including the guards, there were no more than 20 people in the meeting room. But these people would become the core of Stormwind's power. If Stormwind could survive. Bolvar was firmly on Duque's side just now. But now, he was the first to speak up. Oh, my wise Archmage Marcus. Although I would like to thank you for helping the kingdom get more than 50 ships, I can't take it anymore. When you and Lothar went to save the situation, the kingdom lost nearly 3,000 elite soldiers. This is the total number of those who died and could no longer go to the battlefield. Everyone's expression was ugly. The kingdom could not afford to train a qualified soldier for too long. Even if the speed of transporting soldiers and civilians could be nearly doubled, the current situation was that the line of defense would likely collapse before that. Lang walked over and put one hand on Duque's shoulder. He looked calmly into Duque's eyes. I will not regard what you just did as an attempt to force me to abdicate. Stormwind has been sick for a long time. You just gave me the determination to cut off this rotten flesh. But the kingdom's new life still depends on the efforts of the younger generation. I think that since you gave me so many perfect answers before, you won't disappoint me this time, right? If Duque could so perfectly force the aristocrats to leave, but was unable to come up with anything useful in the following military conference, and was cheated by Stormwind, that would be a real joke. But Xueqi was Xueqi, a miraculous person who would never disappoint his supporters. Xueqi smiled lightly. Of course you won't be disappointed, Your Majesty. First, please allow me to introduce you to an important guest. Please, my follower, Aitana, and the guest she has brought. Lang nodded with an indifferent smile. The door of the meeting room opened. Not long after, a freckled female wizard wearing the wizard robe of the Stormwind royal family's wizard group entered with a guest. The guest made the expressions of many of Stormwind's upper echelons stiffen. Because the so-called guest turned out to be a goblin. Chapter 179. Aitana, who hadn't seen her for a long time, now looked a little more capable and experienced than Xueqi. Even though Aitana was a person who had seen the world, she still felt a little uneasy when she suddenly saw so many big shots of the kingdom. After a few deep breaths, she quickly adjusted her emotions. Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, I am the follower of Earl Duke Marcus, Aitana. Please allow me to introduce you to Mr. Sherlock Belfort, a goblin engineering merchant from Stranglethorn Valley. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, Your Excellencies. Goblin Sherlock gave a very standard aristocratic salute. Although his movements were very standard, none of the kingdom's higher-ups present knew how to face this goblin. The infamous goblin. Unlike the goblins in the novels that Xueqi had read before he traveled to this world, the goblins were generally dirty, despicable, low IQ, and amazingly fertile. They harmed humans all year round. Although the goblins in the world of Azeroth were also humanoid creatures, they had green skin that was no different from orcs, were only slightly taller than a human's knee, had thin, matchstick-like limbs, and had a pointed head and large eyes. How to put it, some of their inferior qualities were 100% inherited, such as harming humans. But overall, the goblins in Azeroth loved money more, were good at all kinds of technological inventions, and were better at running businesses. The goblins had set up many companies, which were similar to the structure of real companies before Xueqi traveled to this world. However, these so-called companies were also more vampire-like, such as the notorious Venture Capital Corporation. There was a joke that reflected the reputation of the Venture Capital Corporation very well. Venture Capital Corporation, please join our company. We have investments in every corner of Azeroth. Someone asked, what's the price? Venture Capital Corporation, we're being hunted by the whole world. Someone was speechless. The actions of the goblins were absolutely abhorrent. Many night elf druids would kill every goblin they saw, and if they saw two, they would kill a pair. Seeing the appearance of the goblin merchant, Noxus pointed at his head at Xueqi without hesitation. What he meant was, are you crazy? They were actually working with gnomes. Xueqi smiled and ignored Lothar. He slightly changed the classic sentence from Das Kapital. Hey Sherlock, I heard that if there is a 20% profit, the goblins will be restless. If there is a 50% profit, the goblins will dare to take risks. If there is a 100% profit, the goblins will dare to take the risk of being hanged. If there is a 300% profit, the goblins will dare to trample all the laws of the world. Is it true? Sherlock screamed on the spot. Slander! This was definitely slander. We goblins are of noble character. If I give you 5 million Arother gold coins to bring me the head of the tribal chief, Blackhand. Sherlock's small eyes. Perhaps it was an illusion, but they seemed to have widened 10 times in an instant. Sherlock's sharp voice instantly became incomparably sonorous and powerful, resolute and courageous. I promise to complete the mission. At the same time, Sherlock had already rushed over recklessly and extended his right hand towards Duke, rubbing his index and middle fingers continuously. But in the next second, he felt that Xueqi was joking. Your Excellency Sea King, are you playing with me? No. I am just proving to His Majesty the Storm King that you have supreme courage in the face of money. Be it Lang, Andoin or Bolvar, they all looked as if they were having a hard time holding back their laughter. You! Sherlock still wanted to flip out. Xueqi's words were like a bucket of cold water poured over Sherlock's head. Don't think that I don't know the strength of your so-called suicide squad. It might be possible for you to kill a tribe chief of 10. Great chief? Humph. If I really gave you the deposit, you would only send a group of cannon fodder to their deaths, and then run away with the highest deposit you could negotiate. Sherlock Belfort's face instantly turned pale. He lowered his head and stammered, We goblins are all trustworthy and pay attention to business ethics. How could we do such a thing? As he spoke, under Xueqi's piercing gaze, Sherlock became more and more guilty. His pair of feet also moved towards the door unintentionally. Unexpectedly, a pair of magician's hands suddenly appeared behind Sherlock and lifted the short goblin in front of Xueqi. I have no interest in the integrity of the goblins. The only thing I am interested in is the engineering craftsman in your venture capital company. What do you want? Has Aitana already told you? His life was in the hands of this terrifying mage. Sherlock nodded his head like an aggrieved little wife. All right, I want to add another condition. If everything explodes before it is thrown out, for every person on our side that is injured, I will take the life of one of your relatives, cut off one of your fingers, and deduct 100 boxes of money. Sherlock was indifferent to the previous conditions, but when Xueqi said 100 boxes of money for each damaged item, Sherlock suddenly made a sound like a pig being slaughtered. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws. No goblin will accept such conditions. Don't even think about it. Xueqi sneered. What if I increase the price by 10% and double the quantity? 30% higher. Sherlock immediately calmed down and bargained. Nonsense. Don't think I don't know what you are using. Heavy rock could be made into high explosive, iron ingot, and silk, and it would be done. With such low cost, you still dare to charge me 30% more? Sherlock was dumbfounded. Then, like a general who had defeated a general, he finally nodded. All right, 10% is 10%. Just like that, Sherlock retreated with a long face. Aitana was very nervous and hurriedly apologized. I didn't know, so those things will explode before they are thrown out. Xueqi rubbed his eyebrows and thought to himself, damn, gnome projects are unreliable, goblin projects always explode. If I didn't know this, then I would have played the game for nothing. You are not in this field. It's not your fault. After comforting Aitana, Xueqi finally turned to Lang and explained, didn't you say that you have tens of thousands of militia but don't know how to use them? Weren't you guys worried about how to evacuate the last of the defenders? I will solve all of these problems for you all at once. Not only that, I will also throw in a big gift package. What gift package? Lang was stunned. Xueqi smiled mysteriously. Now that I say it, it no longer feels mysterious. Chapter 180. For 2 days in a row, the east and north walls of Stormwind City were filled with battle cries. However, the people of Stormwind City would never have thought that such a terrifying battle was just a test by the Horde. Yes, it was just a test. During the absence of Xueqi and Anduin, Bolvar was in charge of the defense. Although he knew that the Horde was only sending 1,000 men to test the waters, Bolvar had no choice but to fight with all his might. The difference in individual combat power was too obvious. There were moats, barbicans, city walls, arrow towers, and towering hills equipped with catapults. Such a three-dimensional defense system only erased the disadvantage that the humans had when fighting against the orcs in terms of individual combat. The battle was still very difficult. The 5-meter-tall city wall was still too short for the tall and strong orcs, who were unreasonably strong in terms of athleticism. Orgrim gave Blackhand a stupid idea, but it was also the most effective one, and Bolvar was at a loss of what to do. Fill the river when you see it, build a slope when you see it. The laborers who were dwarves in the eyes of the Horde's warriors but were burly men in the eyes of the humans carried a large number of rocks and braved the deadly rain of javelins to throw the rocks into the moat before turning around and leaving. The process repeated. In just a day, the urgently dug moat was filled by nearly a third. Duke Bolvar could not imagine how tragic the situation would be when the humans were forced to fight the green-skinned monsters in the streets after losing their geographical advantage. However, the greatest consolation was that Xueqi had returned. His strength alone was no less than half of the Wang family's team of mages. Are you really not going to do anything? Lothar asked Xueqi on top of an arrow tower. Xueqi shook his head. No, I'm not going to do anything. It's more beneficial for us. Why? Because our main opponent is the chief's deputy, Orgrim, and not the chief himself. Lothar recalled what Garona had said about the tribe's chiefs and well-known figures. He remembered that Orgrim's specialty was that he was wiser than the other orcs. He's a powerful orc warrior with the wisdom of a shaman's. Xueqi explained, if I had saved the situation from the start, Orgrim would have been able to identify the weak points in the defensive line faster. In fact, my final defensive position is not here. I still have to rely on you guys here. Lothar played with an iron lump with a wooden handle as long as a palm. Are you sure we can survive 10 days with this? Duque said with absolute certainty. I'm sure. All right, I believe you. The rumbling of tribal war drums could be heard from every corner of the city wall near the mountain range. Old Dem was a porter. Apart from his strength, he was practically useless. He, who was over 50 years old, joined the militia purely because he could get a ticket for his daughter and grandson to leave early by signing up for the militia. Lying on the battlements, Old Dem held onto a helmet that had been dented in when he descended. It was obviously taken from a dead man's head as he trembled and looked out. Beside him was his old neighbor Conna, a baker. Conna kept asking in a low voice, "Have we arrived? Have we arrived?" Old Dem looked at the countless green figures surging towards the moat and felt his hair stand on end. Wait, not yet. Old Dem's heart trembled as he looked at the green giants with their terrifying faces and long fangs. At this moment, the kingdom's soldier in charge of supervising them suddenly shouted, "Militia, get ready to throw that thing. Before I give the order, no one is allowed to open the lid below." Old Dem and Conna immediately tensed up. Calm down. Calm down. Wait for those damned greenskins to attack. Looking at the signal flag on the command tower behind the city wall, all the kingdom soldiers shouted in unison the moment the red flag dropped. Nah. Old Dem followed the steps he had taught them and hurriedly opened the lid below the wooden handle. Instantly, the sound of fireworks being ignited could be heard from the other end of the wooden handle. Most of the people were illiterate and did not know that it was a fuse. Throw it with all your might. The commanding officer's roar caused many people to slip up and directly throw these strange wooden sticks with metal pimples into the moat below. There were even some idiots who accidentally dropped the sticks onto the battlements. It was the soldiers in charge of supervising who were quick to react. They swung their arms around and threw the thing across the moat. A few seconds later, when the terrifying green dwarfs carried the boulders and ran to the moat, the green dwarfs suddenly stopped. Boom, boom, boom. A series of continuous explosions stunned both the humans and the orcs. This day, this moment, was worthy of commemoration. Because this was the first time in the history of Azeroth that a firearm had appeared. Even though it was an unreliable product of the goblins, the metal grenade was a killing weapon that would forever be recorded in the history books. What dodging? What resisting? In the face of such firearms that transcended the era, the struggles of the orc laborers seemed to be meaningless. The orc laborers could only watch as their comrades were annihilated. Boom, boom, boom. The continuous explosions were accompanied by the flying pieces of metal due to the explosion of the high explosives. This caused a terrible second injury to the laborers, who were only wearing thin clothes and even had their upper bodies bare. Even 10 meters away from the explosion range, some of the laborers had their throats slit by the flying shrapnel and died. The first batch of metal grenades not only took the lives of all the orc laborers by the riverbank in an instant, some of the grenades that fell into the water also exploded into the sky. In the face of such a terrifying and incomprehensible scene, the orc laborers began to waver. They abandoned their duties and forgot that there was a supervising team not far behind them. They threw down the rocks that should have fallen into the moat and turned to run. However, most of them did not run far before they were killed by the orc supervising team as if they were chopping vegetables. What is that? Orgrim cried out in shock. Let the second wave go. Great Chieftain Blackhand did not care. The second wave of laborers screamed and cried as they were forced to go forward by the orc soldiers with machetes and axes. However, the green formation once again collapsed after another batch of strange lumps of wood was suddenly thrown down from the city wall. The laborers broke down even earlier than their comrades who had died earlier. Almost as soon as the explosion sounded, the last batch of them started to run back. To escape the death that the supervising team brought upon them, they even waved the huge rocks in their hands in an attempt to resist. Of course, they were all cut down in pools of blood without exception. What the hell is that? Orgrim roared. Chapter 181. Through the telescope, Anduin and Bolvar watched the bloody battlefield and the orc laborers who were groaning in pain as they walked towards death. Anduin and Bolvar were tongue-tied. Damn it, these goblins make me feel like I've wasted my years of martial arts training. Anduin smacked his lips, seemingly thirsty from unease. "Duque, how many did you order? I want more of these iron skin grenades." Bolvar was even more direct, demanding an exorbitant price right from the start. Duque smiled without saying a word as he handed over a price list. It listed the price of the iron skin grenades, as well as the skyrocketing price that would require the goblins to work overtime to produce them. More importantly, Duque had specially noted that the already terrible rate of misfires and premature explosions would skyrocket due to the rushed production. That's right, in this era where there was no mechanized mass production, where everything was done by hand, how high could the success rate be? As long as one was human, they would make mistakes and get tired, and there would be differences in the accuracy of each product. And the goblins' lax way of doing things meant that all the products created by these damned and whimsical fellows were extremely dangerous. Bolvar's conscience did not allow him to let his soldiers and militia take such a huge risk. If they did not kill the enemy, and instead blew themselves up first, they would have no place to cry. Anduin was magnanimous. "We should comfort ourselves like this. Yo, a box of grenades is enough to arm a militia regiment." Duque smiled. A militia regiment needs to undergo a long period of training, but this thing only needs half a day of training. That was not wrong. Ordinary infantry training required a long period of combat training to have a little bit of success. Even so, the survival rate of new recruits on the battlefield was so low that it gave any commander a headache. Not to mention the humans who were already at a disadvantage in terms of physique. The strength, speed, and agility of the human recruits were probably similar to the orcs' cannon fodder laborers. There was a considerable gap between them and the official orc warriors. Moreover, the opponents were not ordinary orc soldiers. After fighting for so long, any human commander with a brain would know that they were the elites of the Blackrock clan, a powerful orc clan. Although that was what he said, he still had a toothache. Bolvar sucked in a breath of cold air. "I feel like you're throwing away His Majesty's gold coins." Duque shrugged. "War is about money." Anduin pursed his lips. "I've realized for a long time that your way of thinking is completely different from ours. I sometimes wonder if you're from Azeroth." Duque was non-committal. What should Duque say? Say I'm a transmigrator? That would really be laughable. The archers, who had long been determined to be useless against the orcs, were once again used to deal with the orcs. Archers also had a fatal weakness. Once it was night time, the power of an archer would be greatly reduced even if they used area shooting. The appearance of the iron skin grenade greatly enriched the strategies and tactics of the human side. After all, an archer needed to aim properly, and a grenade would explode everywhere. As time passed, the orcs also discovered the drawbacks of the iron skin grenades. These metal lumps that made loud noises were a great threat to the orc laborers. However, to the real orc warriors, especially those who wore more armor, it was not a fatal injury. It was difficult for the shrapnel from the explosion to penetrate the muscles of the tall orc warriors. As long as the vital parts were not hit, most of them would only suffer superficial wounds. Under Orgrim's suggestion, the great chief Blackhand agreed to better arm the orc warriors who were attacking the city walls. Hence, in the next few days, Lothar saw a large number of orc warriors using cowhide, metal pieces, and even the armor of the dead human warriors to make a temporary armor. With the orcs' protection, the iron skin grenades, which were originally relatively lethal, were reduced by half. They became less lethal weapons. Lothar asked Duque, "Do those damned green-skinned dwarves have anything more powerful?" Duque silently handed over the price of the high-explosive bomb, which required a large amount of thorium to make and was recommended by the profiteer Sherlock. Lothar was stunned for a full 10 seconds before he finally said, "The weather is really good today." Yes, it was noon with high temperatures and a thunderstorm. Thanks to the thunderstorm, all the bowstrings almost lost their elasticity due to the humidity. It was a tug of war. However, the scales of victory still tipped towards the orcs. When Orgrim had the orc laborers wear thick leather armor or thick clothes, he restarted the plan to fill up the river. Lothar knew that something was wrong. On the 7th day after Duque dealt with the Bloodsail pirates, the moat on the east and north sides of Stormwind City was filled up. The orcs even used orc laborers to pile up stones at many places to build a slope that led to the barbican in front of the city walls. The barbican had almost become a pit. Orgrim seemed to be addicted to piling up stones, and he still had a large number of orc laborers rush over. Throw the stones into the human's pit. If you can't make it back, Then throw yourself in as well. That was Orgrim's order to these weak orc laborers. The direct result was that the number of orc laborers dying increased exponentially. At first, the humans tried to clean up some orc work or dig up some slopes every night. However, Stormwind City was severely lacking in heavy machinery. Not only were the gnome excavators expensive to rent, but Sherlock was also unwilling to let his subordinates drive the expensive robots into the city that was bound to fall. Unless, Sherlock rubbed his thumb, index finger, and middle finger together again. That gesture of asking for money. You know what it means. Xueqi was held up. Just as he expected, the Horde quickly discovered Stormwind City's weakness. It was the place to the north of Stormwind City near Stormwind Port. It was different from the steep cliffs of the valley in the south. The mountain roads to the north of Stormwind City were dangerous for the humans, but for the orcs who were good at climbing mountains, it was not a true dead end. In the first 2 times, the orcs successfully sent a few scouts down, causing a commotion among the citizens of Stormwind City. After that, King Lang decisively let Xueqi, who was the strongest fighter in Stormwind City, guard the mountain peak. This prevented the orcs from attacking from that direction. The sea, on the other hand, was the domain of Kurdalas and Duke. Even though they could transport more than 10,000 people per day, the situation was still going downhill. After the citizens of Stormwind City held on for more than 20 days, the biggest problem for Lang and the citizens to cover the retreat had arrived. Excluding the evacuees and those who died in battle, there were still 10,000 people left. Lothar estimated that none of the 50,000 people would be able to escape. The orcs were already in a frenzy. They would not allow the humans to evacuate at a rate of 10,000 a day. Stormwind Port, which was their lifeline, did not have a fulcrum like Stormwind Fortress. What should they do? You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.